So is there ever a specific reason that you make the decision, other than getting too close to the ridge or something, to turn and circle in the other direction?
Very good. And you know, actually, for me, I rarely reverse direction. Now that's as a recreational pilot, because I'm going to take my time and I'll make the adjustments one way, and for me, my mental mapping stays very consistent then. I find that when I reverse direction, it kind of reinitializes everything and I'm more likely to lose it. You know, a high quality pilot is in a race with the sun. They're looking to do, in his case, 285 miles. From the moment they launched, they were looking to get off, get sustained, and then take advantage of the streams. And I have to believe that at some point he had 50-mile-an-hour ground track, and probably with a cloud streak, you know, that he could go. But they're in a race with the sun to make record. For us, we're going to take you get a nice you leapfrog to your personal best. My thought is to just keep turning the same way with 30% calibrations on your turn. The lower you are, the higher percentage you want to stay very much tight with that mapping plan, unless you have a strong signature that says to change that plan. For instance, if you are working very tightly, a thermal core here, and it's kind of marginal, and you see 400 or 500 yards away somebody else over here, and maybe even doing a little better, you then should reflect and say, well, maybe my model of what the size and scope of this thermal is greater. Maybe this lift is from here to over here. And you can then expand. If he's really doing well and he's got it hot, well, then you might leave lift and come on over, you know, over there. But there is always an old adage, and it says, don't leave lift for other lift, especially when you're fighting for that first 500 feet. When you see a bunch of people sinking out and you've got some meager little thermal, I'd suggest you want to stay on that thermal like a cat on the back of a dog's neck. You don't want to lose it or you're going to be out. So your question is, do you reverse direction? If you're in a race with the sun, if you're really sure, if you see a bird circling right there, if you see the other guy doing that, perhaps you want to change. You might endeavor to change, but I'll submit that you might lose your orientation as you try to figure out it's here. It's not so much there. There it is here, and you know, and I think that you'll have overall more consistent gains by doing that. Remember that as we say that this is what a thermal looks like. A thermal can be any size, any shape. It can have multiple cores. It can you know, it can be here, and you know, with a little bit of shoulder on it. It can be anything. And the atmosphere being so reactive, they can have a lifespan of 5 minutes, just as the clouds. They can have longer. You are constantly modeling in your head what is going on at the moment. Thoughts? Okay.
Things I learned is if you are going to go out, especially a blue thermal day where there's not the clouds, if you have several folks going, we spread it out a couple hundred yards or so each. I haven't experienced what I was told. And you have a lowest person, I think, is down. But anyway, whoever finds it, everyone migrates to it to get up and then spread it out to search. So little tactics like that.
When you guys are making your run to the North Ridge, better than, unless he's carrying a good line, and maybe there's a cumulus cloud that's just forming, and you have reason to make that, and the other guy's kind of slowly gaining as he goes, say, from the Tiger North launch, you know, and trying to make that gap out to the North Ridge, then you might follow. But otherwise, it's wise to kind of spread out, and as you go, you converge.
Has anybody here heard of the term called a sucker bubble? A bubble that's really, really cool. That basically you got a major thermal here with little thermals kind of popping off around it, right? Based on the wind, those thermals can get sucked into that bigger thermal, right? Well, if the wind's strong enough, that little bubble will go through the thermal almost like a bullet. And when it comes out the backside, you can be coming in and you get the tiniest little bump and you think that's the thermal. And if you turn too quick, you're on the backside of the major thermal and that bubble is really, really small. You just got suckered into turning. So it's kind of a cool, never thought that a thermal could go through a thermal and then do nothing. But he says sometimes if you do your circle, and you're like, what just happened? Push out further, because that thermal pipe just got pushed through something else.
So to come back to the concept of when you encounter a thermal, that you are going to lightly tighten on the lift, on the heave, and you're listening to your vario. If you find success and you've made a 2,000 foot gain, a 2,000 foot gain, and you've said, hey, that was a worthy one, and then you lose it because it might move with the wind. And one way, once you're kind of halfway up, if you start looking for where the cloud is, then you go, oh, gee, instead of kind of sticking with that ground point there, which I kind of locked in my brain there, now I'm going to, oh, there's that dark part. Wow, I can even see on the fringe, I can see how the sunny side is showing active spire, active curl in the cloud. It says this is active lift. And you might even migrate a little bit forward. If you lose it, then widen your turn and try to reacquire where it went. And if you don't find success, for me, counting one circle and 300 feet per minute or more sink, then I am going to the next location to endeavor to reacquire. And that next location, is as you made your turns, as you're making your turns and you're flying your variometer and you're looking around, you're allocating some of your bandwidth to, what's your next move if you really lose it here? Or what was your objective in getting high? Some people say, does anybody get nervous when they get really high?
Yes, I'll admit it.
Okay, and I will throw to you that if you put into your mindset that you're tanking up for that altitude so that you can make a sinking, losing transition to the next location. If you're getting higher and higher and you're going, gee, this is higher than I want to be. If it's because you want to make that leapfrog to your next best, you want to get over to the North Ridge, you want to get to the towers, you want to cross I-90 over to Mitchell Hill, or some of these points that you've heard people talk about, you'll want to have tanked up. And you say, well, then you'll start saying, gee, I really should be leaving now because I'm getting within how much of the cloud underneath we're not supposed to go? 500 feet, you're supposed to leave. But you'll find yourself wanting to tank up as much as you can so you can make that transition and try to get to the North Ridge. Getting established over Squawk is a little bit more difficult. And when you do that, you might tank up extra if you're just going to keep your triangle within our little sweet valley here and land at your car. And you'll want that extra. And when then you have that motivation, I think the heebie-jeebies of the altitude subside. So just that point, you want to lightly tighten on the lift and widen when you want to reacquire. 300 feet or more sink as you go up. Now it's not here. 150. 150 is interesting. That means you're actually in 50 feet per minute lift. We said 200 feet per minute sink on your glider. 50 feet per minute on your. It says, hey, it's around here. There's something still going up. But at 300 feet, you increase the speed of your glider with your speed bar, and at 500 feet, you really want to evacuate the area and get to your next logical require thermal. Anybody add something?
Yeah, so I noticed quite a few times that I was happy in a thermal 2-3 feet, right, reasonable, not too fast, and someone come join me for a few turns, and this guy just leave and take a straight line and do a wider turn, and he was like 300-400 feet above me, right?
And you change your model accordingly.
Yeah, but the thing, if I follow, then I lose, right? So this always amused me that some high-end pilots, they can sense there's a line, and it's like irregular shape, and then they can follow a fine line and be like 300-400 feet above me in with all that. So that's the part that I have not acquired that kind of sense. So when to leave a thermal and which direction, which line to go. And someone can figure that out. I just always ways.
Right, and it's those pearls of wisdom when you're in the shuttle truck going up or around the bonfire, and a veteran murmurs something that it really is a pearl. You put those things together, and so as I kind of think that when you're making those 360s and you're playing your Vario and you're observing things, you have more and more insights as to where your better probability is to be successful in your goal to make the farther cross country.
Brian, what do you decide on if you're going north or south? But you know ahead of time, or
Wind direction.
so you know once you go into the headwind, is that
No,
no? You're going south on a north way.
Yeah, you want to.
Yeah. Why is it normal then that most people always go north off of north?
Well, you got the Carnation Valley, and
It depends if it's a bluebird day, there's certain, they know where the thermals are.
Right.
So,
What about those who haven't gone south before? What would you say as far as fear of LDs or anything like that?
I'm always looking, you're always high enough. I mean, when you fly, that's all you have to do is go up, because everything else is filled. Filling your wingtip, which direction, or what side of the wing you're getting. If somebody had said something about which direction do they want to turn, well, it really depends on what your wings do. Because you don't always enter a thermal straight into it. You could hit the edge of it, your wing goes up, well then I'm gonna turn left.
Yep.
You got yanked, but you probably went straight into it, so then you can turn back to right, and then same with the right tip,
That's one thing I flew with Mitch was just how neutral it was, and all of a sudden we just drifted. And he's like, "Yep, there it is."
But I think finding the LZs is the easy thing, because you're always spotting, so like, okay, there, I'm good in this, because depending on your height, then you start looking a little closer if you're sinking. But higher you are, you're always just up there, because I'm like, I got a bunch out in front of me, I'm really high. I'm not worried about it, I can see.
So south, so you're just playing confidence. That
There's a lot of LZs south.
Yeah.
I just know I'm gonna land in the landfill. I just know it. Right in the middle of that huge freaking.
Well, I've been low over there, but that also kicks off pretty normal, so.
One thing when I was playing with Mitch too that you said is when you go into a headwind to try to catch the next thermal, if that thermal is going up at that angle and your sink rate is doing this,
Yeah.
you will never hit it.
You always,
Especially if your head's on grid, you're trying to get over it, right? Because you're on the backside of all that dropping air, and you just can't get into it. It's hard.
You have to be higher to get it.
So, yeah.
it's always better.
You're on
than
bar to
thermal
be able to
on the
get.
upwind side.
So let me throw out to you again. This is another basic when we talk about that initial heave. For the new, I think everyone here has made 1,000-foot gain. Yes, everyone, and everyone would agree. Have you've all been in air where there's just been some pretty big up, and the novice encountering their first lift or their first big lift might have more of a reaction when the glider enters in and it pendulums him back and he goes starfish and his eyes go big and he's not sure he doesn't really want any part of this and he flies up, and it goes in and flies straight with wide saucer eyes and it surges forward and he has a rough ride and uncoordinated. And to remind you that when you find that heave, if it's particularly strong, that may suggest that you want to get on that weight shift and you want to get that glider turning. It'll take it a second or two to turn. And once it banks, then for me, I'm kind of counting, especially in strong conditions that have my attention where this might not be fun. and there's an element of self-preservation concern, that you're making your turn and you're listening to your variometer, and if we're fortunate to nail it a first moment in 1,000 feet per minute up, and your variometer goes beep, and you make that turn out of fear for finding what's on the other side of it, and then secondary, you're turning for the lift. You make that turn, and again, that's where if you have any element of consistent intensity from your variometer, it should be smoother there. And so to turn on the heave and then make those 30% changes. For me, turning in like this, I hit that lift, get my weight shift on, and get the bank and get the glider on end. One thing about taking the glider from the pendulum back, being successful, it tells you it's workable, it's organized enough, but venting its energy like this. And in essence, when you brake on that inside wing, the glider is actually rotating its pitch on the inside wing, and I will say it's more stable. Not only hopefully are you isolating a one-way track of air once you get her dialed in, but at least half of your wing is highly resistant to closure. You don't hear of inside wings going away, not from closures. Anybody ever have a closure on their inside wing when thermaling? Alex?
I've seen spins.
No, yeah, but that's self-induced pilot error, over braking on your thing there. If our inside wings were to go away, if that was a character of the wings, I wouldn't fly these things. This means that you could, be close and that you'd be sliding in, you take that hit and you'd slide in. But fortunately, now most of your wing is very resistant to closure. If when turning you take an outside hit, we don't even really care about that. We say, oh, that's just mark the perimeter of the thermal, and I'm going to migrate a little bit this way my turn.
Yeah, that's really helpful because I'm still having that in the back of my mind, that fear that in that transition zone on the edge of the thermal, when I'm in the turn, that's going to create a collapse.
Right. Inside wing is pretty insulated. Outside wing, we don't really care. That's just a marker. So big heave, turn that glider, get the energy going. It's just cool to know. This situation now goes away. The energy, having to manage surges, really goes away because now you're venting this way, off to the side. And when you're in big air and you go, wow, I know, hey, I'm 3/4 away around on this and my vario is still singing. That means I'm in the center, and on an aggressive day where the thermals are hard-edged, we can have them where it's going up strong and the perimeter is penalizing, or it can be soft-edged. And you enter maybe this little claw and you exit out. And know that you can have 1,000 foot per minute lift and it can be soft-edged. You can have 400 feet per minute up and it kicks your butt when you exit. It doesn't work given the velocity of the thermals available, how rowdy it can be. So there you go. The point is to get her venting this way. You find solace in that there's some security there, and then on a rowdy day that maybe that's the best place to be. Okay, when the glider heaves, that's when you turn and tighten up. And even if you've already, whether you've just initiated into the thermal or you're tracking its movement as it climbs, your job is to get that instrument singing all the way around. And as you're making your turns, you're tracking not only how you're working with your vario, you get to that third mark, you start looking at the clouds, and you're trying to take in all these data points. Next, for me on working in that harness, hopefully you're all kind of leaning over and getting your head outside the risers on your basic gliders. For those of you that are flying pods, and frankly, the only pods I've ever flown was when I was a hang glider pilot. where you're being more straight up and maybe you don't need as much input. But the concept that when you're making those 30% adjustments, there you are, beep, 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 it's waning, and you want to take your circle just a little bit that way. My thought is, as you're turning, you keep your weight shift on, whether it's a subtle weight shift, and as you come around, and my sun orientations are so, now I'm coming around there. For me, I keep my weight shift on. I level my hands for a moment so that it becomes an arc this way. I'm not going to fly straight. I'm just going to oblong that way. Listen for the instrument to validate your hunch. And so it would look like this. I weight shift on there. The glider starts to track that way. I just kind of level. My weight shift, though, is ready to go. It's like a loaded slingshot. And then when the instrument goes, beep, 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 and then you're already weight shift, boom, just hit it, and your glider wheels around, and you make the adjustment and hopefully get a superior centering on your thermal. Does that make sense? So I encourage you not to straighten up out of your weight shift. Not to straighten up on your weight shift. Try to kind of keep it there as you get to know your glider. And it might be like, however you're making your weight shift adjustment in your harness, but to keep that pressure on as you're making those 30% adjustments in your turn. That bring up anything. Alex, you've been doing so well in your flying there. You were rookie of the year in your first year, and you jumped from an A glider, and now you're flying a
M7.
M7. What do you have to contribute to these people's satchel of knowledge?
I'm still learning.
Well, I'm still learning.
I mean, in terms when you widen the turn, I very often widen the turn in the wrong direction and fall out of the terminal. And then, you have to be able to look at the instrument where the terminal was and return. Don't just keep wandering there.
Look at the instrument, because your instrument will tell you where that thermal was, doesn't it?
Yes, there's a dot.
Which, this has one function to make some noise, and that's what we use to fly. And basically, I still fly that. All right, that's for my hang gliding days. And now what you guys have, I could barely turn it on, and for some reason I don't even want to see. So you guys are at a whole nother level of assistance on tracking the thermals, accessing data from previous flights, and so forth. That's where you tech people, and I imagine people like Mitch can get up here and teach me quite a bit. All right. So anyways, there you go. Good. Well, I think that was a fair dose. I feel like this might be a good break moment.
Perfect.
Thank you. Any closing thoughts here for this moment? Okay. Our time now is.
I would like to touch on electronics though, in my back or what instruments.
Well, that wouldn't be me. So it's 11 o'clock right now. This gig is, generally speaking, this is the first Saturday Chalk Talk, and this was brought on by Cody and Ken Peterson, who went on a cross-country insight flight with Mitch, and so it was to my pleasant surprise that you guys self-organized to make this happen. The old man is. So anyway, so thank you, Ken and Cody.
I'm saying, 45 minutes ago, where are you, man?
There you go. Well, he'll. I'm sure there'll be an
So
adjustment
before
here.
Mitch comes, why don't you talk about your little XC with Mitch? Where did you fly and what did you do?
Well, we went over to Ravensdale. We landed in Ravensdale, near Maple Valley.
So you want that?
Yeah, that was
Or just
the thing.
Give us 5 revelations. We're like, wow, you learned this, you learned
Ken,
that.
did you
from that
take-
trip.
Well,
Anything
the
that you
thermal,
like-
the sucker bubble was a really good one. Timing your launch is huge. It's not just you feel a breeze coming up and the wing's gonna fly and
Yep.
get off the mountain good. You got limited time to get that 500 feet. Like that is super important, not just,
So
oh,
what
I
are
just
the
want to get off and hope
decision?
something happens.
Yeah. So what are the decision points that you learned?
Well, the launch was everything from knowing if that cycle is centered on us or if it's off to the side. Those trees are whapping harder over there, right? We're getting some, but we're not getting a lot. Well, we're probably on that outside, which is gonna be a tough pull up. It's, the one's coming up stronger over there for some reason, right? So time the cycle to be centered in. You know how we always get on the north launch when you're coming in for a top lane, you'll get bumped there, right? Well, if that's part of the cycle that's coming up, it's over there, not in front of you, right? So try to time it where the cycle's in front of you, not just a cycle.
How do you know? How do you tell? Where is the?
That's something we gotta, that's why I want him to be here, to try to explain more about how that is, rather than just up here and him saying, well, see, it's windy or there. Yeah, we're getting something, but the wind direction might be a little cross, right? It was this way, and all of a sudden it's a little cross. Well, it's probably because it's over there, and we're on the outside of it, right? Compared to just straight up.
We should have invited them.
We should have invited them, yeah.
Maybe sometime we should have.
All right.
Talk.
But, and then just flying so loose, like when we get bumped and everything, right, we react. Well, that bump is probably getting pulled into a thermal. Like, you gotta let it pull you there to know that that's where it's at. I mean, it was so smooth. Just so smooth.
So how do you follow the bump to let it pull you into some? What's the technique?
Let it fly. Don't tell it what you want, let it tell you.
Well, if
How
you're
do you end up
outside,
balance that with active flying? Though? How are you?
It wasn't that crazy of air. I mean, active flying, I think it has to be.
But that almost goes into a little what you're saying is what when Santa Cruz came here long ago and you talked about cross country and just
Mark,
not saying the safest
that
thing,
was
but
Igor's
less
video.
reactive.
I was
And the guy who kind of sat there and just wrote it out versus reacting to everything and micro adjusting, he did better overall, right?
Correct. I mean, it's.
And this comes down to bump tolerance and experience too, right? And not fearing a little something like that or actually just leaning into it if you will.
Correct. Yeah, bump tolerance.
So it sounds to me like the big part of that master threshold is the ability to understand what's happening to the air so that you can actually pick the right place to go to. And part of that is gathering information. So the less input you give to the glider, and the more you listen and you try and understand to try and figure out what the right map is, what is actually happening. That's probably what they're doing there.
Correct. Yep, what side of the cloud. He explained the top third, the middle third and the lower third. He's at the top third, he doesn't even look at the ground. He's not even looking at it. He doesn't even care about it. He's just looking at the clouds at that point. And we were seeing swallows and all that. Oh, there we go, all the swallows, which was really weird. Swallows are cloud-based, picking bugs off, And then he would point out how you could see condensation rising into the cloud. If you go there, it's gonna be a little, we'll get up into it, but if we stay out here, we're still deep, 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 right? So where do you want to go? What do you,
So were you on the radio with him or you were tandem with him? Tandem.
So we should call out. So what's going on? So we just tried to figure stuff out. So Mitch checked in at 8:30 this morning, said, cool, looking forward to it. Awesome. Thanks for setting this up. And now his phone isn't answering.
Yep.
So so if you're wondering what the hell, that's as much as we know.
where does he live?
Thank you for that update.
Not
he
sure.
lives in Green Lake.
Oh, yeah. So
It's not far.
Well,
not this one. Yeah.
Maybe
Well, I was
it's
So
just
he's,
wondering
so
if we could go
everything's, yeah.
Ride,
demonstration or
track,
something?
and see if there's an accident or see if there's, something on the side of the road.
Well,
or-
his phone is going to voicemail. It's the other weird part. So.
all right. Well, let's do this. Everybody put a hand up or don't block somebody else. Hip, hip. Hooray. All right, there you go.
Hooray.
All right, we'll send him a picture. So anyways, I was hoping that he would walk in, and I didn't want to disturb the setup here, but there's an example of cloud base. Left it there.
Ken, any updates on Blanchard today? Has the scene changed at all?
They downgraded, so, I mean, you can get cloud base and fly it up.
Cloud base is what, 300
Above the water, yes.
Can you just leave it vague with cloud base? Why do we have to talk about numbers?
Good. Well, look, I guess I think as you mentioned, I think this is probably a good breaking point. There's coffee there, there's donuts, and we'll probably get a little bit of word. If there's anything anybody wants to broach here, it kind of sounds like that from Ken and Cody, that perhaps the Chalk Talk round will start. We've been radio silent also because we weren't sure that to wake everyone up, given the COVID. I'm amazed that the government really has left unincorporated King County alone. If you weren't aware, the mayor at the when COVID was a new word, tuned in on paragliding when we had 2 accidents within 3 or 4 days. And can you find that? We'll get. I'll segue into the Igor video here. Yeah, we do. We do. Well, that would be a good one to tag on. We did have So, yeah, right. So then you can have closures. And so anyways, but this is our status on our dear Igor, who Sherry and Mark Jenkins have hosted at their home. This is Igor just last week. You want to give us an update on?
Well, I was just saying, as you're watching this, remember that he is paralyzed from the knee down. He cannot sit here and by knee only lift his leg. He cannot do that. If he lifts his leg, it's coming from his thigh or his butt. And when he got out of the hospital, he asked the doctor, okay, what's my best case scenario? And he says, you're gonna be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. So, go ahead, and this is 2 months later from when he was released out of the hospital. So 3 months from his actual accident.
3 months.
Yeah.
March 15th was the impact.
Actually, he was in the hospital for a month, so they had to be the first part of March.
And
March 15th was when he
choose the
hit.
videos.
Okay, how did that?
Okay, it's recording. Shake it. Nope. There it is.
Oh, it's the wrong button. Hang on, keep going. So he blew up L1, and they had to put caging around it, and he's heavily braced right there from the knees down, but this is a big deal. His mom doesn't know. Mom is in Moldova, she's blind, has been for years too, and
Shake that booty.
He works out so hard, and he has such a positive attitude. It's inspiring. That was last week, yeah.
how important protection is, guys, when you see these skinny harnesses and so forth. This could have been worse. We'll show you Nick Hazel of, I don't know, the last 10 days. We do have on video a hit he took in an old GHD 10-year-old ID low-C and the internals of the harness was attacked from the impact, and he walked away and we launched 45 minutes later. Hey,
Yeah, think about his video. He said he couldn't get the song out of his head for
Where's that new side step? There we go.
And what's amazing is he went for a flight about a week ago.
That was his
Solo.
second. That was his second.
2 flights?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's a wheelchair.
He's using the, yeah, the cart.
Just play regularly right now. You know, I mean, the impact, you still got the impact.
Nice. I like the boots.
and now he'll take the boots off and you'll see what his movement is.
All right, so
So
Mr. Charco would like to know what are you learning and doing differently over the last week or two? What's coming better?
Walking, balance, and everything else.
You're getting some stronger, I know, in the
Absolutely.
upper arms, your legs.
There's a great setup right there. You got room. Strong, better,
Mark
stronger.
and Jerry really rising to
Very good.
vulnerable support.
Mission accomplished.
What? How many hours? Those are good boots. They were nice and stiff for your ankles.
those are metal
And
back and his
So what's your routine these days? How's it changing? Or what is your routine?
routine people. It's always different, but mostly focus on squats that offers me to kind of hold balance like this and
When
maybe
he got to our
try
house,
to
he
do
couldn't
one.
stand.
Oh!
He could not stand for
Don't
1
fall,
second
don't fall.
by himself.
Run 2.
Nice.
Okay, don't fall, don't fall. 3. Oops, that's easy, boy.
Get back, foot, get back.
Oh my gosh,
It is. Big progress quickly. How many flights have you had now? 2? And another one coming up. It's got a north wind, maybe.
Good solid wind and good mood.
And you got, where's your dance moves? Did you used to dance a lot?
No, I just learned it.
And you just got the crutches, what, last week?
Every step he takes is like
Nice.
slack
You know, we made that nice little ramp for you. You don't even use it anything.
Not anymore.
Yeah, nice. You said you needed it in June and you were spot on.
And he is driving on his own.
He
Want something?
can't
I
drive.
think that's a good thing
He
to
doesn't
go
have his license yet
end the
because he
evening
doesn't have
on.
the licensing still. So you can see how his feet, he has.
All right,
no
well,
control over where his feet go. He's working on that.
Save a good evening to Mr. Cherico and maybe Mr. Santa Croce.
Have a great rest of the day.
They suspended it because
All right, that was.
he's paralyzed.
And disabled.
So, just to say that I really, that's why we encourage you guys to get A gliders, encourage you to go with the best protection you can. This is dangerous. When you enter into the pod realm, I know they made some advancements, but you're probably really having your security. It's L1 that he blew up down here. That's the common injury. Usually speaking, it's a clamshell for 8 weeks and they don't do anything. But when you hit this hard,
He's got 5 levels fused, not just one.
there you go. Okay, so you're on a pendulum here, and I kind of smile and say I never really liked paragliders. You know, the hang gliders I believe are safer. I think skydiving is safer than what you guys are endeavoring to do. You're having to do a launch ballet with all kinds of curveballs and unknowns that are been given to you on your launch. You get off launch, and then we can throw up an abundance of examples and teaching moments here to say what could happen. But you're often then when you're in the air dealing with what we've spoken about, it's your job to maintain the integrity of your glider. And then when you're coming in on that rock and roll landing field, there again, there are times where I'm at 100 feet and I go and I'm just really getting rattled, and on top of it, but we've got a passenger in front that, you know, is saying, oh, but can't we go back up? And, you know, but please, you know, we're give me a moment. You know, as we try to put this in, and that very reactive atmosphere, your midday flying, as you seek to get 10 flights, you're up to how many now? 10. You know, your midday flying approaches are just a whole nother, it's a horse of a different color than that that shaded landing field that we are graced with because it's Squawk Mountain. I mean, what we have here is really this is very special. But you are fighting for the integrity of that wing, and you are just Humpty Dumpty, an egg on the end of long lines. And if you hit minor, you know, you are subject to hit. Remember, you want to land, if you're in a downwind situation, you do not want to incur a turn. Your protection is on the bottom of that harness. Your body handles it best, taking it on square. So there's a little bit of
Mix.
Yeah, that's that. There you go. We're going next to now. Nick walked away from this, and the gang here just did. Cody and Matt, what's his name? Penzi, and Todd Andreas put together a maneuvers class over water, which is there for you. And they'll be doing more. I think they paid $130 a tow, $900 for 6 tows. Okay, good. Let's throw in Nick.
120.
That's good.
I wasn't signed.
There you
up, I
go.
just showed up.
So this is now, know that, Igor has 500 flights and was flying a low to middle B, an advanced epsilon. This is a low B, or excuse me, a low C or high B Rebel 10-year-old, which we just had here.
That was the one the other day.
Yes, and that probably isn't a whole lot different from what Igor experienced. His was a little bit more in flight. Scott was up there. But as we look at this,
You got half the single collapse already in the
Yeah, that's.
this is Nick. So he takes a hit here. Now, I was up there, and I just want to really encourage you guys. His left hand, which would have been the one that would have defended him, needed to be the one in play. And frankly, I don't think he ever engaged it. This glider's going to, the glider recovers on its own, but clearly there's something over here, a bare paw of sinking air that is giving him trouble. And here the glider surges. Your job is to touch the brakes to rein it back just a little bit. And particularly in his case, he needed both brakes here. But I want you to notice that this side of the glider, as he takes the hit, never really has a self-preservation braking. Maybe there's a hair there, but not enough. I believe that this glider, if he just touched that brake there and got the eyes on the lake, that he did not have to make this turn. I was standing here and really eyeballed it, and I felt like he never
even weight shift. Did you see any weight
now,
shift?
now look, now I was pleased to hear Santa Croce. I saw for the first time. He puts up so many nice little vignettes. I like Superfly, Santa Croce, teaching vignettes, and Fly Bubble. I'm the old guy, and I'm getting quite antiquated and obsolete. But there are basics with which I have not ever for 2 decades subscribed to this idea that when you take a hit, that the first thing is to weight shift the other way. You have a brake in hand. You don't want to overbrake, but that is the easiest way for you to engage a leveling to catch this glider. The glider actually, for just a moment or two, as that showed, it's a slow wind. But there's a point where with the, your high B and whatever, where it winds up and it's not good.
Chris actually has a video on YouTube that he talks about this special thing.
Yes, I just saw it.
Yeah, it's like you need to actually listen continuously to your edge of your wings. As soon as you hear a collapse over there, by default, you should start, checking on your other side brake.
I agree. The brake is in hand. And it's just been said 98% of the time, weight shift and then steer. Look, you got just a couple of moments. I'm a tandem instructor, tandem pilot, so our weight shift is not so easy. You grab the hair on the top of the person, shift them over, that doesn't really fly. But I'll submit to you that you want to get on that leveling brake to initiate, it going level. When the response is you commit amongst yourselves, say, oh, you don't want to stall the inside. Yes, correct. You don't want to install it. You don't want to stall it. But this is unfortunate. And
did he say anything about it? I mean, why he didn't? Because it seems like right there, it's so easy to put your brake on.
Well,
just tap it, like you said.
There you are in the moment. So look.
Yeah, he said after the fact, he says, I did not protect.
Yeah.
So
he just.
And I was for me teaching. I am very conscious as to where you guys are looking. Oftentimes the issue is you're launching off, and the glider starts going toward off north launch, goes towards the trees. I'm actually, where are you looking? If you look at the impact point, you're gonna go there. If you look at where you want to go, you'll fly there. In this case, Nick was he took that hit, and I could see he was looking up at this, and as the closure became low-sided, I saw him take a stroke to bring it back and another half pump, and by then it started to wind up. Know that when your glider takes this hit and everything unloads, there is no brake response. There's no amount of pumping that's going to bring that back. Your glider is very happy to take this little bit of leveling, and the air is ramming in, and it will cross-port over and start to open. As you start to level, then you're going to get a little bit of tension on your lines, and it is quite responsive. But But Santa Croce's vid also says, don't look up on it. I subscribe to that. I don't much look at my wing. There are comp pilots there who are really playing their glider, and this is where Mitch and some of you, the high-end guys, can say they're sitting back, and frankly, they're on edge the whole time. Ask some of these guys, do you enjoy flying? Well, I have to pay a lot of attention. And I've talked to some high-end guys who say, I'm always scared. We're flying at the ENA and B, and, then recreational pilots, and you want to enjoy it. But word to the wise, you're a spy for me, and there's a lot that I can learn and update. I'm sitting out there as a spider, and I am feeling what's going on. And when the glider moves around, I don't much look at my glider, unless afterwards I just want to see if everything is happy. So look where you want to go and go there. Be very clear. You got the brake in hand. If you take a hit, you can level your glider. We could go into plenty of vid, but we're kind of at the tail end of this game.
To build on that, two things. One, just had a conversation with Santa Croce, and one of the main things I learned for active flying, which I didn't know, is prevent the collapses. I used to brake a little bit. Sometimes you don't brake a little bit. You crank on that bastard.
If you feel it.
Braking prevents deflation, is what Santa Croce says.
And sometimes, sometimes the incident will give you a precursor, a little foretelling that it's coming. But sometimes that you're moving through, and there you took the lift, and then the glider just jumps or it just collapses, and it doesn't give you that rattlesnake shake, giving you a little bit of warning. And that's where where you want to be on it. You take a wrap, you're feeling the brake tension through here, you're feeling the tension here, and you're learning how your glider moves and how it talks to you. Your glider is pretty forgiving for the first couple of seconds. If your initial reaction is one that is in your interest, it really does square itself away. Active flying is, kind of touches like so. So anyways, we do try to show you guys with our the video documented closures and things of things that didn't go well without a reaction, without a helpful, and this will help because it's here. It's lots on YouTube, but this is homegrown right here at your site. We are blessed to have Tiger for lots of reasons. You are flying at a site that has a marine influence that kind of quiets a little bit the activity. If you were in Chelan, the contrasting temperatures, the desert scene and scenario, it can be probably yet more frequently carnivorous. Tiger can be carnivorous.
Was there anything specific about the conditions this afternoon that you noticed that would have let you know that it was?
You're putting students off.
Does anybody?
You are pushing students off, so
it was surprising. This was a surprise. Now, this isn't like an older glider, and know that the Rebel has a propensity to closure. But these are all airbags. Your ENA gliders over a lake where they go up and and this is old measure, somebody can update where we are, but they used to be, to earn an A in the asymmetricals, to take 70% closure at the leading edge, 50% at the rear, and they had a video document because the manufacturer says, hey, that was like this, that was an accurate test. They really do this, and the measure used to be a 45-degree turn with no pilot input, and it opens. Can anybody update that? How about what is it for B on asymmetric?
Less than 90. I think it's less than 90 on a B.
Less than 90 with no pilot input.
Right. So,
but again, that's without air where you're falling off into a hole like where you just saw there. So there you go. Again, very special. You are able to take the hang glider. We had to have a truck. It takes 45 minutes to set it up, 45 minutes to break. Frankly, I would be annoyed if I didn't get an hour flight. With the paraglider, you do this, and 8 guys get into a car, and you go to Colombia. I got a smart one. So anyway, but the trade-off in a 4-minute setup and a 5-minute breakdown, whatever. The trade-off is that you have to fight for the integrity of the glider. Your lines, this and that, and you're exposed. You're on a pendulum, and this is all that you're addressing. So you want to have equipment. And I again suggest make sure that you have good back protection. the way you come in for your landings. You really need to come in with wings level. If you're downwind and you're down to the last little bit of altitude, you need to allocate to come in with wings level. Okay.
So did anyone made a comment to compare this next incident with Igor's incident?
Well, Scott was here, saw,
Witness both?
when you saw this,
Pretty damn similar,
Yeah.
very different outcomes.
It's just that
You got
landing,
lucky.
right?
Yeah, we all get lucky. And so you kind of hope that all of your learning opportunities have a low price tag. So, yeah, very kind of similar, multiple collapses. He took one when the wing was coming up, took a second. So different situation, different weather conditions, but,
Looks like you went into the
actively
hill
fly.
head or feet first.
well,
or face.
no, he said he did a full 360, and normally speaking, when we hear that someone got away, got up from their impact, I am always amazed how people go into the trees and they fall 100+ feet and they're fine. And if you and most don't hit anything but sloshy vegetation, and the steeper the hill, you can imagine the stop is spread out. I sure would like to take another look at Nick's harness, but it's all detached inside. You want to look, you want good protection. Everybody wants the hike and fly stuff, but right now those Verso 3s, they are top of the line. They what is it? 20 G's. They're down to. They put an accelerometer in the harness with a load. They drop it from 8 feet and they measure how much did that accelerometer make. I think the majority of harnesses are somewhere around 30 G's get to the pilot. Those Verso 3s, not only do they reverse, but so anyways, and then so when the new guys are getting harnesses that are skinnier, I want light. This is very much part of the game. And Nick was able to dust himself off, come back up, and relaunch.
Even if you don't take a hit like that, sometimes you just flat out come in on a hard landing.
Oh yeah.
And,
I have to say,
What the harness
he had a progress 3 and really
Yeah.
get it and bring it out.
I would like to say,
Monsters and everything else.
Yeah.
I would love to say something, is that I was at Valle at the lake landing field and watched a gentleman come in, and he had kind of dodged a few people, but he never got out of his harness. He was in a pod, and he stalled it, and his butt was here, my head level, came down. That was bodyboard on an ambulance. So if he had rotated his legs down and had his feet underneath him, he would have just stood up. So there's no shock absorber here, and I'm a really huge proponent in get your feet out underneath you. These are your landing gear, and you have about 1 inch of shock absorption in your spine, and you've got 3 feet right here. So use them. These are one of your biggest safety devices that you have in your equipment.
And a broken leg is a lot
I
better.
would much rather break a leg.
Well, might well be. I'm just going to show you now. You guys are fortunate to have grass. This is a downwind landing. I made a mistake and realized that I'm not going to try to reset this approach, and I was going to land in the green. But this is smoking in with maybe a 7-mile-an-hour tailwind. I've landed plenty of people slide in, but taking this woman here, you can see my face isn't real happy. I've made a tactical error, but I know that I'm going to bring this in for a slide-in landing, which means we're just trying to tangent in across the grass rather than land it with a full brake flare. And so that is there for you, landing in these very lush fields. But of course, then you might have a tailwind, and you need to spot in the first 20% of your landing field to not get that tailwind push taking you into your end perimeter. I am a fan of coming in on my butt, but there are
if you're sliding, that's very different than if you're dropping. If you are
so you will go through your list and say, how does it work? If you're landing in a rubble field, in a riverbed, you'll need to decide, if you're gonna try to land this and try to squeak in, and probably not a good thing to slide in. You're gonna want to put your feet down, but that's up to you. I'm just showing you an option here, just saying that you don't want to land in a turn. That the protection is for that center hit square, and your body performs much more structurally sound by hitting square. There you go. Well, thank you, folks.
Hold on. Mitch is on his way in. Oh.
Yeah, sure.
He apologizes tremendously that this is not like him, but he went for a morning run this morning out in an area that has no cell service and he got lost. So he's not back to cell service. He told me he'd be here in 20 minutes, which is probably gonna be about another 15 from now.
So he can set
So-
world records, U.S. records on a paraglider. That makes way through complex airspace. Goes for one run in a local area.
There you go. So look, and the neat thing is now you'll be able to compare, Vince, and what we said, because we come from entirely different realms. Frankly, I didn't know Mitch's name until about a month ago. So there you go. So if you want to hang, then maybe you have a coffee and those of you who stay will get very
When I sat down at 10, I was like, just tell Mark to pull up your video or my video of my crash.
And
What you see it? I crashed in Switzerland.
yeah, I've been withdrawn from social media for several years. Well, we can do it.
They're waiting now. I'll show you. Let's see. It was a helmet cam, and I am very, very, very lucky. Actually, this.
it's not so helpful.
Would you prefer Cuervo or Kraken?
I'm okay.
Oh, you're okay.
I'm okay.
I might settle you down.
Are you guys ready to get started?
Whatever.
You've probably been ready for an hour and a half. So yeah, that's guys, first of all, I want to really apologize for my tardiness. This isn't normal for my character. Usually I'm early and they're ahead of time and prepared. Not that I'm not prepared, but yeah, I really apologize, and I respect all of your time, and I'm sorry to act disrespectful of your time in this moment.
Yeah, but
So, in general, if you see me around any time and you have a question for me, you want to discuss the flight you just had or whatever, know that at this point I feel like I owe you all my time because I was disrespectful of yours. So I'm very sorry about that.
Mitch, thank you, no worries.
Cool, cool, I'm glad you're here. Real quick, guys, instead of being in such like an audience format, do you think we could kind of get a little bit more circular, just so we can make eye contact with each other, and so people are listening to each other's questions and stuff? So let's just adjust it to a little more circular for a second. Maybe the chairs So kind of in my mind, I have a number of things I've planned to talk about for today. But it's very good if it kind of goes organically with questions and with things that come up. And I was thinking to do more of these in the future. So on this particular one, I wasn't thinking to be very site specific with Tiger. Right? Everyone here has flown Tiger quite a bit. And we can talk about cross country from Tiger at another date. But first I wanted to talk about some they sound basic, but I think they're good concepts and somewhat advanced in ways too. Concepts about glider control and communication, and then kind of bleed that into thermally, right? Because ultimately when we are thermally, we're really kind of feeling the air that we're in, and I like to think of it like a bird feels the wind with its feathers, right? The amazing thing we have with the soft aircraft, with the paraglider, is that it moves and stuff with different wind. When we're going through different air masses, it moves. It gives us that movement down through the harness, through the brakes, through all this stuff. So we're literally feeling the air like a bird with its feathers, and we want to be in the best place to feel that air and try to take it, try to use that communication, that data in the best way we can, right? So first of all, one place where I see some people making mistakes is how much brake they have on, right? So if we are turning in lift, right? And when do you guys usually turn if you're trying to thermal? So when do you decide to do a 360?
Depends on the lift, like maybe a few seconds into the lift.
Yeah, it's a pretty good rule and one we've probably heard, right? You want to be going up for 3 seconds before you decide to put the 360 in, because any danger in, well, the detraction of turning is it increases our sink rate, right? Anytime we turn, we go down faster, right? So if we turn at 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds and then we fall out of this thermal, we're actually going down faster than if we had flown through that air going straight, and we're not exploring more air, right? So if we turn at 2 seconds, fall out of the thermal, come back around at a lower altitude, we've just wasted our searching potential, right? Being in the same place. So 3 seconds is a great rule, right? If we go through lift for 3 seconds, we might think it's big enough to fit a 360 in it and go up with that 360. Does that make sense? Cool. So when I do decide to turn, I have 3 rules to tell me which way to turn, okay? The first rule is pretty obvious, right? If there's a mountain there, I'm not going to turn into the mountain, right? I don't want to be in a thermic environment. When we're flying thermals, we can assume there's going to be turbulence. We can assume there's a possibility of deflations and collapses, right? Flying thermals. That's what thermals are. Up air, down air, turbulence in between. So I don't want any part of my 360 to be less than 400 feet over the ground. Right? That's a pretty good buffer zone to give you altitude to deal with things. Turns out the thermals within 400 feet of the ground are rarely very good anyway. right? We want to be a little bit higher. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So if the ground's nearby, if the mountain's on my right, and it's an issue, it's close enough to be an issue, I'm going to turn left, right? First rule of which way to turn. And if that's the case, I'm going to feel totally fine with doing figure eights up against the mountain, right? If I'm the mountain, figure eights like this, right? Because we know anytime I'm facing the mountain, if I get in sync and it's there's more tailwind than I suspected, I'm getting in that 400-foot buffer zone. Does that make sense? So figure eight is fine. One really good rule I was taught when I was new to paragliding was every 360 starts with a figure eight, right? So if you're looking at it over your shoulder thinking you're doing a 360 and the mountain looks a little bit close, hey, take it into a figure eight, right? No need to screw with that mountain. And if we watch hawks, eagles, vultures, anytime they're near a mountain thermally, they're doing figure eights, right? They'll do figure eights plenty. Even when they're high, they'll do figure eights plenty, right? So the experts show us figure eights work just fine. First rule, right? Terrain. If terrain's near us, we turn that way. And obviously, all these things are if we get to the side turn direction. If someone else is in the thermal, what do? Circle with them. Circle with them. Same direction, right? As the people in the thermal, or even a nearby thermal, right? Same direction. Cool. Second is if I feel asymmetric, we're going to talk a lot about these feelers today. If I feel asymmetric motions in my glider telling me about where the thermal is, okay? A couple things I might feel. Every glider is different, every pilot's different, but a couple things I might feel before I get to the thermal, I might feel it kind of tugging me towards it, right? Who's felt that before, right? The glider kind of pitches forward a little bit, and if the thermal's tugging me to one side or another, it might kind of like pull that way a little bit, right? So if I'm feeling that, that's telling me, oh, okay, look, the thermal's a little bit over here on my right. So I'll kind of let the glider take me over there a little bit. Then there's this other feeling once we hit the edge of that lift, right? And that feeling is more like a rising feeling. And if it's asymmetric, let's say it's on the right again, I'll actually feel the right side of my harness pushing more against me, right? I'll actually feel more brake pressure on the right side of my glider. And the right side of my glider will be going up more in that lift, right? So those are the kind of like two different asymmetric things. It's a little interesting, right? Because in the first one, when your glider's getting sucked towards the thermal, the right side might go lower, right? But then when you're hitting the thermal, the right side might go higher. The difference is that pitch, right? That's the difference to be cued in on. When we go to brake, how we're feeling the brakes is going to have a lot to do with that. So we'll get back to that. So that's the second thing. If all those cues were telling me the thermal's on my right and the ground's not an issue, I'm going to turn right, right? I'm going to think, okay, the thermal's over there and I want to turn in that direction. So if the ground's not an issue and everything I'm feeling is very symmetric, not one side or another, right? Then the third rule is upwind. Okay? We want to turn into the wind. Why do you guys think we might want to turn into the wind?
The strongest core.
The strongest core. Really good point, right? That's the part of the thermal that's punching up more vertically, that has more vertical lift, is going to stand into the wind more, right? So it's going to trend to the upwind side of thermals. Does that make sense? The other side of the thermal, where's the whiteboard?
It's not functional.
No work.
Well, nothing is
It's permanent.
Okay, whiteboard's coming. So upwind side, because the stronger core might be there, and because that's the side that's has the least penalty for falling out. Cool. So I'll do this without whiteboard. We're so techy. So like we talked about, the strongest core is going to stand up into the wind the most, right? Let's say the wind's coming from this way. What that means is this side of the thermal, the upwind side of the thermal, is going to, I'm turning it now so you guys can all see, is going to be a very clear edge of not lift and lift, right? Very easy for a mental mapping, right? Thermal is all about mentally mapping, trying to place yourself in this rolling, rising column of air without references near us, right? It's a really hard course in like creating this map in your mind. So this edge, the upwind edge, is typically the really defined edge. it's very easy to fall out of this side and say, oh, the thermal's right behind me. This edge, imagine this wind coming around the thermal, these bubbles, I call them sucker shards, bubbling off the thermal, right? We'll talk more about sucker bubbles in a little bit. And turbulence back here, right? Because all of a sudden in a lot of wind, this starts to act like an object in the wind. So the wind's kind of rolling around and going like this, right? So entering a thermal from the downwind edge, hey, we have to do it plenty almost every time we launch the first thermal, we're entering downwind edge, right? Is a lot harder to figure out where that edge is than entering upwind edge. So if we have the option, this is the side of the thermal that's a better side to play with. That's a better side to fall out, right? This side's super hard for our mental mapping. It's a jumbled mess in there. Can you guys kind of visualize that a little bit, right? And in general today, I'm going to be talking about thermals with kind of organized principles, which is an easier way for us to conceptualize them. But probably thermals are kind of more like a lava lamp where they're always changing, and like hundreds of thermals might become one thermal a few thousand feet high and stuff like that, right? So know that we're somewhat simplifying the whole way thermals are. Cool. So 3 rules. What are the 3 rules? The first one?
The terrain.
The terrain, right? Don't hit the hill. It's a good rule. Second rule? Yeah.
Just follow the flow, right? Kind of.
Yeah, exactly. What is the thermal telling you in your glider? Where are you going? And the thermal?
Against the wind.
Yeah, exactly. Into the wind. And the other reason into the wind is, hey guys, we can lose our objective real fast if every single thermal we're drifting further away from, right? For instance, you guys know what it's like to land here when it's windy, right? If it's windy from the north, you don't want to go too far that way, right? All of a sudden, it's really hard to get back this way. So in general, in cross country or in flying in general, if your objective is not downwind, you want to go downwind as little as possible. Sometimes our objective is downwind and then it's all good. But if your objective is crosswind or upwind, you don't want to turn downwind very often at all.
So you're wanting to turn upwind so that if you pop out of it, when you come back around, you're entering it on the upwind side. You're
Yeah, let me help visualize that just a little bit here, right? So thank you guys for getting the whiteboard right. So this is the thermal right here, right? This is the upwind edge of the thermal. We're gonna say it's pretty. Can you guys see over there? If we have to move a little bit or whatever, we're gonna say it's pretty defined, right? Because once again, here's the wind, here's that vertical lift, right? They're interacting like that, right? As we get later in the thermal here on the downwind edge of the thermal, this downwind edge of the thermal, right? We're gonna have kind of the side of this thermal, we're gonna have these bubbles leaving the thermal, right? You can imagine that wind kind of pushing bubbles off the side of the thermal as we go down. We're gonna have turbulence back here, just from the wind going around the thermal and swirling around. We're gonna have the weaker part of the thermal here in general, right? So if you do fall to this edge, it's gonna be really hard to get back into it, right? Because for your mental mapping, on top of that, right? Let's pretend for a second that this edge was consolidated, which it very rarely is. Sometimes it might be, but very rarely. Look how our glide ratio interacts with this edge if we fall out of it, right? The lower we get, and we're always getting lower on a paraglider, right? We're always going down through the air, right? No matter what, the air has to be going up, but we're still going down through it, even if we're rising in altitude. So as we get closer to the thermal, it's getting further and further away from us when we come in on this edge. Does that make sense? Look at this. As we get closer, as we get lower, closer to the thermal, it's getting closer to us on this edge. Isn't that rad? Right? Look at that. It gets closer and closer and closer, right? As we go down. So this edge, there's a multiple of reasons. One is this glide ratio interaction. A really big one also is the mental mapping, having a defined edge. And then also, we want to trend a little bit upwind unless our objective is straight downwind. All make sense? Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. So, let's talk a little bit about once we do make that 360.
So just for clarification too, so if you were flying into the headwind, or you're taking off, you're flying into the headwind, and So if you were to go through what you can through 3 seconds, you're on the tail side of it now, aren't you? So then,
So almost always when we're launching, I think that this is your question. So let's go from it. Almost always when we're launching into the wind, right? We like to launch from mountains where the wind's coming up the mountain. So our first thermals we're typically finding on the downwind side, right? Right from here, usually there's the thermal out on the point over here, right? If it's north wind, we're kind of approaching side windy downwind from it, right? Or we're coming to this thermal that's on the ridge that comes up from landing, right? And similar thing there, we're approaching it side wind up, down. But basically, when we take off from most mountain sites, our first thermal we're getting on the downwind side. So more than 3 seconds is fine, right? What we wouldn't want to do is turn too early, right? And how many times have people thought they were in 2.5, 3 seconds of lift, turned, and then there's no lift there anymore, right? Yeah, all the time, right? That's a sucker bubble, right? That's one of these bubbles that have sheared off the thermal. It is rising. It is a rising bubble, but it's not a column. There's this rising bubble, and you can do a circle. Sometimes you even get two, and you can be like, man, damn sure I didn't change the shape of the circle. I'm still on the lift. I'm feeling it well, and I just fell at the bottom. Remember, we're going down through thermals at like in a straight line 240 feet a minute. In a circle, most of our turning radius is probably more like 300 feet a minute. We're going down. So if it's a bubble, like we get to the bottom of it pretty quick. Right? Even a column eventually has a bottom. Every thermal eventually ends. So we are going down through the air in the thermal. So if those sucker bubbles are from turning too early. You have a thermal here. You go, oh cool, I'm going up. You do a circle and then you fall out of it. You can't find it again, and now you've got to interact with this. Right? We've all felt that, right? And typically there's some sink and turbulence right here, right? So you're trying to push against sink and turbulence, and the further you go to try to get the thermal, the further away from you it is.
And that's the way I roll.
So
So how do we decide, right? Is it the sucker bubble or it's just the right?
Great question. So first of all, when you try to think, am I entering the downwind or upwind side of this thermal, right? If it's the upwind side, no need, right? So if this is the thermal again, right? So if it's this side, no need to wait for any longer than 3 seconds. 3 seconds is enough. Sometimes 2.5 might be okay on this side. Because once again, if we fall out, it's pretty easy to just keep our turn going, know where the thermal is, know how to get right back into it, right? And there's not much penalty of falling out on this side. It's not so bad, right? And there's not sucker bubbles on this side, right? The sucker bubbles get drifted off.
It's smoother air.
It's smooth. It's more organized air. This edge can be plenty not smooth, but it's more organized. We should we get one kind of checked, that type of thing. It's totally smooth air. It's gonna be so nice. I lost track real quick. Yeah, so those sucker bubbles are one thing we really want to avoid. What I was saying is if we enter this side, 2.5 seconds might be okay. 3 seconds is enough. But if we enter this side, which remember the first thermal of the day we often are, and try to get a mental picture of which side of the thermal you're entering, right, based on the wind. If we enter this side, there's nothing wrong with waiting 5 seconds, 6 seconds, 7 seconds, right? Flying all the way through the thermal and falling out of this side, not much penalty because you just mapped the whole thing. Yeah. And likely you feel the most lift right here, right before you fall out. So it gives you a really nice map. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It
takes longer to turn.
Yeah. And how many times have you guys seen here at Tiger, some pilots just barely staying up against the trees, and then pilots going out front and getting the ones that take them to cloud base? Right? It's a pretty common thing, right? Because we'll go into that a little more, but these thermals that really want to go vertically hard aren't the ones that are just rolling up right next to the tree line, right? The ones that really want to go vertically hard are going vertically hard, right? They're cracking off from the ground, and you can find them much higher. And if you think about the kind of usable lift right next to the trees, sure, a lot of times you can like kind of stay up there for hours, but to actually get up and out, you need more consolidated air, right? You need a bigger air mass of air that's rising. So often that will be a little bit out front, right? It's not unusual for pilots to kind of be on the trees until they see a bird or another pilot climbing out front. And then really the climb out often happens a little out front, or it could happen you ride the trees and then like from the point above it's going off, but still a little bit higher, right? Cool. So we've kind of decided when to turn, right? We know if we're entering the downwind side, we're going to wait a little bit longer. One more thing about that real quick. Another cue for me that I shouldn't turn yet.
Sorry for giving it. Wait a little bit longer, or even, like you said, go all the way through and map it out first.
Or even go all the way through, yeah. Yes, it's not like I go all the way through every single time, but there's not much penalty to that. There's a lot of penalty to turning too early, right? We've all felt the soccer bubbles, right? Where you're sure you just flew through 3 or 4 seconds of lift, right? Yeah. So we've all felt that. We might. Okay, so if I am entering the downwind side of a thermal, right? One cue that I'll keep going further forward, right, is if I actually feel within the thermal, my glider getting sucked forward. Remember, we talked a little bit ago about that feeling of your glider getting sucked towards a thermal. That same thing can happen within a thermal if there's a better core ahead of you, right? What are actually the physics of that? I don't know. I like to think the thermal's sucking me in. But I think there's physics of the air rising, maybe having some suction, and then I think also, let's go away from the physics side. But you guys know the feeling, right? My thermal's kind of drawing me into that thermal. Sometimes within a thermal, you'll feel that, and that's telling me like, okay, I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet, and then usually you'll get a better climb rate, and your glider will stop drawing and come overhead. That's your turn. Does that make sense? Cool. So then the turn, right? When we turn, obviously we look, we lean, we use some brake, we turn. We want to use our weight shift in these gliders a lot, right? Brakes are fine. We have to use brakes a certain amount. We all learn to fly with brakes. But if you are staying absolutely weight shift neutral and only using your brakes, you're going to be less efficient gliding, climbing, many things than pilots around you who have that glider connected to their hips, right? Think of the glider as like a kayak, right? If I want to put my weight on that side of the glider, I can. If I want to put my weight on that side of the glider, I can, right? I can use my hips to decide where my weight is on the glider and get communication back through the glider with my hips, okay? If you imagine what brakes do, let's go this way. Brakes cause drag in the back of the glider, right? You guys can all see that, right? Brakes are basically dragging the back of the glider. Is drag good for aerodynamic efficiency? No, it's not, right? We have to have a certain amount of brake on to have communication with the glider, right? That tells us if the glider's above our head, right? Basically, if we have this tiny little scoop in the back of the glider and the glider starts to shoot forward, there's less pressure on that scoop, right? We feel less pressure through our hands. Our hands come down until they feel the pressure again, effectively stopping that shoot. And as the glider goes back overhead, once again, the pressure will increase. Our hands will come back up to keep that 2 pounds of pressure, communication pressure, right? That's what we're doing following that communication pressure. We're feeling how much pressure is on that scoop in the back of the glider and keeping the glider overhead. So we have to have communication pressure, right? Otherwise, we have collapses all over the place. It's not so fun. We're not in control.
The seat, if you put your hands on the seat, right?
Great question. Can we get to it in a little bit? Remind me in case I forget. Let's talk through brakes and then get to see it. It's a very good question. So we need communication pressure, but you don't need, if you're flying a straight line and you're just trying to communicate with the glider, you don't need more than communication pressure. And in fact, I'd say our communication goes downhill the more pressure we have because we're starting to get bigger muscles involved. We're stiffer with it, so we're not flowing with the glider as much, and we don't have as much finesse. Does that make sense? So you want just your normal communication pressure is just enough to feel the changes and follow the changes. Finesse is the name of the game, right? If you're finding yourself like this in the air, you're not feeling that glider very good. You're adding a lot of drag to the glider, and your performance is going to go down, but then your control in turbulent air is going to go down as well, right? So we get our turn done. We want a lot of our turn done through weight shift, and obviously we're going to need brake to get some of our turn done as well. think about, some thermals are beautiful and smooth and awesome, but who's been in turbulent thermals? Right? Some thermals are pretty turbulent. Sometimes we're getting rocked around while we're trying to make this 360 and the inside wing keeps coming up and it keeps trying to throw us out and all that stuff. Well, guess what? If the air is seeing this, you get thrown around a lot more. Does that make sense? This feels the changes a whole lot more than just enough brakes to have communication. Does that make sense? So if you're sitting neutral in your seat and only using brakes to yard the glider around and using a lot of brakes here because you're a little nervous also, you get thrown around a whole lot more than that pilot who's nice and light on the brakes, using what they need to do to get the turn radius done, but not nice and light on the brakes with just communication pressure on the outside. We still want to know what that outside wing's doing, but just communication pressure and using their hips to affect the glider as well. Does that make sense? Cool. So really think about how that glider wants to cut through the air, right? We want it to be this knife cutting through the air. If we put a ton of brake on, which it happens when some pilots get nervous, right? They start to pull down the brakes, they start to get real heavy. We're not feeling the glider really well when I'm using those big muscles in the back of my back and shoulders and stuff. It's just not, we're not finessed in that way, right? And we're asking the turbulence, hey, could you throw me around more? Right? I want to go really slow with a lot of drag so you can just throw me around a ton. Right? If we're riding a bike in the wind, if we ride like this, we get thrown around by the wind. But if we ride like this, we don't. Right? So same thing here, right? We want that glider to be really svelte, really smooth moving through the air. Cool. While we're talking about that outside hand, right? Our brake cascade, right? Our brakes come through a cascade, right? Bunch of lines coming down to one brake line, right? Then the one brake line goes through that little pulley that's connected to the riser, right? It might be connected to the riser by something this long or by something this long, but there's always some length there. And then it comes into your hand, right? So if my outside hand, let's say I'm doing a right turn, if my outside hand is way out here, what part of the brake cascade am I feeling more of?
Middle.
The middle. The middle. What part of the brake cascade do you think I want to feel more of?
Tip.
The tip. Or at least everything even. Right? Right? And on different gliders, this effect will be bigger or smaller, but there's some effect on all of our gliders, right? There's some difference on all of our gliders. So if I'm making a right turn and I have my hand way out here, which who does this? It's already, I used to. Right? We see a lot of pilots doing it, right? It feels kind of comfortable because this pushes you in your weight shift. It feels like you're balanced out here.
Just that fine tension and balance kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
In theory, but
yeah.
Right.
But here's the thing, right? If we're feeling the center of the glider, we need to have more brake on to have tip communication, right? And therefore we're causing more drag, right? Therefore we're slowing down the side of the glider that we want to be turning around the other side. We want that side of the glider to be pretty darn aerodynamic, to be pretty darn svelte, right? Making it through the air. So a good place to have your hands in this situation is in line with the riser. In line with the riser is always even on the brake cascade, right? And you can't really do wrong even on the brake cascade, right? Like acro pilots like their hands out here because they want to stall the middle of the glider before the tips, because naturally the tips want to stall first, right? Because they're small. Right? They'd like to stall first, but in acro, we try to practice a lot of tricks out here so that you can stall the whole glider at the same time. But in cross country, we want to be feeling those tips, right? The tip is really where the communication is. Does that make sense? So outside hand in line with the riser is a pretty good place. When I fly my comp wing, high aspect ratio, skinny glider, my outside hand is a touch inside the riser. Yeah, I'm feeling it like this. Yeah, feeling that outside tip. Because I'm really concerned with what that tip is doing, and I want that side of the glider to come through. Now, I'll tell you, in the World Championship in the Super Final, about 50% of the pilots at this point, and it was fewer a couple years ago, so it'll be more next year, are flying with their outside hand on the rear riser. Not great, right? Why do you think that is? Less drag. Less drag on that side, right? They feel... And especially on a two-liner, you have quite a bit of communication through the rear risers, through the Bs, right? And that communication is not at a sacrifice of the scoop. That communication is somewhere around there, right? So it's not nearly as draggy, and you feel the glider. So not that you guys should all go around and have your outer hand on the rear riser, but know that like at the highest levels of paragliding, people are finding that like that brake scoop on the outside wing, like it makes a real performance difference.
I have a question. Yeah. When does this start working, this line? Does it work on delta or the highest ratio?
So rear riser control,
in thermal.
in thermaling, I'm not doing it on 3-liners. I'm doing it on 2-liners. I'm not doing it. I don't feel like I have enough communication to really feel the thermal on a 3-liner. A 2-liner, I do. I still feel, even at like the super final world championship level, I still feel like if it's a squirrely thermal that really needs perfect communication to follow, I might be better chasing it with brakes, with my outside hand on the brakes than with my outside hand on the rears. So I still think there's, even on a 2-liner, more communication through the brakes. And it makes sense because of the scoop, right? We're feeling subtle differences more because of that scoop. So I'm actually not one to do it like all the time at those high level races. I do it some, right? Smooth, weak thermals, I'm doing it. And then kind of the rowdy ones, I feel like I'm better to put myself in the right place with brakes.
How do you determine? Just by feel of what that, like, the benefits of having the risers compared to the brake, or like, what makes you decide?
by feel. And like I said, like the really weak, slow climbs, this drag difference is going to be the bigger difference between how I climb and someone else climbs, right? But then these rowdy climbs, your communication and ability to put the glider at just the right place in the thermal is going to be the performance difference. Does that make sense? So it's like in huge open thermals that are really weak, the performance difference is going to be in the drag, and in rowdy thermals, it's going to be in the communication, your ability to use that communication. Good question. Yeah. So that stuff makes sense? Okay, cool. Let's go a little bit deeper into it. I think the best way to use this board is going to be on the ground in the middle. So if anyone can't see, come in tighter, and that'll be nice to come in tighter anyway. I'm not sure I'm going to be perfect for the video, but oh well. Because we're kind of looking at a thermal from above anyway. So
We want the dead markers to go into the garbage can, Mitch. So
okay, cool.
They haven't been used in 2 years now.
Okay, if I find any more bad ones, they'll go away.
Throw them at Casey.
So now let's talk about how to make these 360s, right? First of all, when we're thermaling, our visual references are like almost gone, right? Sure, sometimes we make our first 360 500, 600 feet away from terrain, but when we're 1,000 feet above terrain, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, visual references on the ground are doing you like very little good, right? Our ability to put ourselves in space, to map where we are in space, is all about the shape of our circle, the shape of our 360. Does that make sense? So if we're doing nice even 360s, then I can accurately say in my mind, oh, I was going up better on this side and I wasn't going up as well on this side. Does that make sense? Right? But if we're not, if our 360s are kind of looking like this, has anyone used that tool, Avery? Yeah. So anyone seen like beautiful 360s in your track on Avery? And anyone seen bad ones? Mm-hmm. Sometimes, right? Yeah. So if you're looking at Avery and you're seeing 360s like this, right, all over the place, not stacked on each other, not nice. Obviously, they might drift with the wind a little bit, but you want really nice 360s. That has a lot to do with your ability to mentally map where you all are in this column of lift, right? And if it's like that, you have no idea, like, okay, I felt more lift back there, but where was back there? And was it because I'm swinging through my glider? Every time we change turn, right, we have some swing motion in the glider that's going to affect the gravity we feel in the harness, what the variance says to us, because wind pressures change the variance pressure, right? And we're going to be swinging around. So even our altitude, right? So even actually going up or down, we're swinging around is not actual information about the air we're in. It's more information about what we're doing under the glider. Does that make sense? So this nice, constantly baked 360 is our goal, because then we have less messing with our data, right? We have less interference with our data from us being thrown around or throwing ourselves around underneath the glider, and we have a better mental map, right? When the thermal is really nice and smooth, right? When it's this nice, big, smooth thermal, yeah, we can look around the turn, put our weight shift in, put our brake in, and it's going to be a 360 turn if we just keep everything the same, right? It's going to be a 360 turn. It's going to work well. But sometimes the thermals aren't smooth, right? Sometimes they're these bumpy, chunky things, and they're kind of throwing us around a little bit. One analogy I have there, any skiers in the room? Snowboarders? Yeah, sweet. And if you're not, you probably know something about it, so hopefully it's not. Is skiing like, let's say, powder or groomer versus skiing crud snow, right? If you're skiing powder or groomer, right, someone from a mile away can see this beautiful, nice, big carving turn, and then they'd look at the edges of your skis, they'd zoom in, look at the edges of your skis, boots, knees, everything, and yeah, sure, you put the edges in and like keep them about the same pressure, and the skis just do this nice big carving turn, right? Or snowboard, whatever it is, right? But if it's crud snow, same thing, a really good skier, a really good snowboarder, someone can look at them from 2 miles away and see this really beautiful carving turn, but then if you were to zoom in on their edges, on their knees, on their the whole thing, you'd see stuff going on, right? And we know good skiers can do that, right? Good skiers can make a beautiful carving turn through really variable snow conditions. And it's not as if they're thinking, okay, right now I need to come off edge pressure, right now I need to go on it, right now I need to come off it. They're just kind of feeling it and working it, right? Very similar thing with carving a paraglider through a turbulent thermal, right? You're looking around, you're feeling the glider, and you might be going like this a little bit, right? You might be working it to keep that glider on edge and keep it going, right? And same thing with the spectators, right? A good pilot in turbulent conditions, you don't look at the glider to see if it's turbulent. You look at the pilot's weight shift and hands, right? If they're a good pilot in turbulent conditions, the glider can be very nice and smooth and making beautiful, smooth turns. But if you see their weight shift and hands going like this, it's turbulent conditions out there, right? And then if they're a beginner pilot, you can just look at the glider.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does it help just watching your tip to be propped in the same place and you just keep the tip on the same altitude towards the horizon?
Yeah, I think that is a help. Yeah, yeah.
But you're not doing that
relative to the horizon. You know, I look around my turn, kind of at the tip, but if I'm doing it, it's in my subconscious. It's not something I've concentrated on. Great question. Yeah, but it's not something I've concentrated on. Too much visual focus in any one place could also distract us from seeing birds and stuff. I'm not saying it's a wrong thing, and absolutely that's going to give us a good idea of our bank angle, and if our bank angle's steady, we're going to make a steady turn, right? So that could be a very good tool. I haven't used it, or haven't, not in my conscious mind. Probably my subconscious sees the tip a lot. Now I just wanted to get into this whole side thing about how to look for birds, but I won't. We'll do, in a later time, we'll talk about scanning. It's important. Cool. So turning 360s. Let's say for a moment that, once again, I'm simplifying everything, but that's the way it has to be. That X right there has more lift than the rest of the thermal, right? We're going up everywhere else, but that X has more lift, and I'd actually like my circle to be centered like on that X, right? Cool. So I fly into this column of lift, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. I start turning. Oh, cool. Okay, I'm going up, going up, going up. Okay, I'm not going up as much. I'm actually not going to make a major big change right there. What I'm going to do is just remember, okay, I'm not going up as much. When I'm on the opposite side, I'm going to extend my circle, right? Okay, I'm going up really, really nice, going up really nice. Boom, I hit more lift, right? I'm near the X. What would happen right now if I extended my circle towards that X is that actually be extending my circle that way. Do you see? Because I'm a step behind, aren't I? Can everyone kind of see that? So instead, on the 180 away from it, I'm going to cut this side a little shorter. Does that make sense? So what I do when I'm thermaling is instead of like make immediate changes to my turn radius based on what I'm feeling right now, I make a change on the other side of the circle, then back to this side of the circle, right? So let's start this again, right? I'm turning, feel more lift right here. I'm going to keep my turn radius the same, and then on the opposite side, I'm going to cut it in a little bit, right? But I still remembered, ooh, I did feel more over there. So on this side, I'm going to deliberately open it up a little bit. Why do you guys think I'm saying a little bit?
So you don't miss it.
You don't.
It could shift.
Yeah, so it could shift, and so I don't have a lot, so I'm not turning like this, right? So I'm not making these big, crazy movements, which is going to throw off my mental maps. Small, really predictable movements is going to help our mental map. Does that make sense? Right? So I'm coming around here, and I just extended the turn a little bit, but because I cut this side off a little bit, it was actually a decent shift, right? Extend the turn a little bit. Cool. Going up more again right there, right? And predictably, which I already know, I'm going up more there. The last couple turns, I felt less here. So I'm going to cut this side off shorter. And predictably, oh, cool, I am going up less over here, right? And then I'm going to open this side up more. Okay, more again here. Now let's say we went this way enough, right? And let's say now, which thermals are shifty and the wind shifts as we go up, so the upwind side changes and stuff like that. Let's say now this X is the one, right? Cool. So I'm going around, right? Going around. I anticipated that I might be cutting this side off shorter, and then boom, I feel more lift. Oh, cool. Okay. Well, this side of the thermal, maybe I drew the X in the wrong place, but this side of the thermal is liftier than that side. So what I'm going to do on this side, what am I going to do? Shorten it just a little bit, right? And then on this side, I'm going to extend it just a little bit, right? And in this way, we're kind of like always making these little adjustments the whole way up, and it should be small adjustments. And guess what? The thermal will be making adjustments the whole way up, right? We know wind direction changes as we go up, right? How often is the wind different in landing than takeoff? Pretty often. This is a pretty small mountain, right? So we've got changes in wind as we go up. One thermal cracking off over here is going to change the wind around it. All sorts of changes going on. So the thermal's reorganizing as it goes up. It's shifting around. Remember, it's a little bit more like a lava lamp than this simple thing I'm talking about. But I see a lot of people making these like immediate huge shifts as they're thermaling, and it throws off your mental map, and it makes it really, really hard to see where you are in space, right? So I'll just kind of show it one more time with the lift, because I'm not sure I really showed it that well. If I'm coming around a circle and I feel more lift, boom, if I say, ooh, I feel more lift, and I flatten out, and then I go back into the climb, and I say, oh, I felt more lift, and I flatten out, and you see how like my circle's not actually shifting towards the climb, because I'm a touch behind that more lift, aren't I? I'm actually shifting it like a little bit different. And it's the same thing with sync, right? Yeah, that stuff makes sense.
I understand the point when you did corrections and dash runs. You said 180, but then you sort of said that you do two corrections per rotation. So
yeah, so let me map it out a little bit by walking around, right? So your side of the thermal has more lift, right? So that's a nice variable. So I'm staying in the turn, but that side wasn't so good. So I'm not going to walk over the whiteboard, but let's pretend I walk over the whiteboard here. Right? So a little bit closer to this side.
So you make correction on 90 degrees. Like
well, I didn't mean to if I did.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
He just tightened it up.
Yeah. So now I tighten this side up. I didn't mean to make, if it looked like I made a correction there, sorry. So I tighten up this side, and then I'm actually going to extend this side. And in this way, I'm planning, right? If instead I say, oh, I'm sorry, beep, 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 and I open up this way, I didn't open up towards you. Does that make sense? I opened up 20 degrees past you or some, whatever degrees past you it was, and that would depend on the radius of the turn. Does that kind of make sense? And it's a very similar thing with lift, with sync. So. And you guys try, and the other thing I'm happy to admit is I don't know everything, right? And I've been kind of teaching this thermaling technique for a while and doing this in my head too, and I climb pretty good. So it works out pretty well.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you go into a thermal, it seems to work better at a better angle or a steeper bank going into it, and sometimes it works better going in a little bit flatter and you
Yeah.
get more lift. Then
Great question. I like it. So thermals are different sizes, right? And when do we have the lowest sink rate? When are we going down the slowest? Or when we're flying in a straight line, where are wings level, right? So, yeah, maybe it was a confusing question. Yeah, when our wings are level, we're going down the slowest, right? Wings level, no brake, no speed bar, we're going down the slowest, right? That's our slowest sink rate. Maybe a little, actually maybe a little bit of brake, right? But anyway, somewhere around there is our lowest sink rate. Any amount of turn we put in increases our sink rate, right? So a spiral dive is really hard to thermal up with, right? You need a pretty darn strong thermal. But you can fit a spiral into a very small column, right? And, you know, like a huge 3-minute turn is a very low sink rate. We're almost like flat sink rate, right? But we need a pretty darn big thermal for that to work, right? So each thermal and each part of the thermal, because thermals might go like this as you go up in atmosphere, right? Because their stability layer, the lapse rate isn't the same all through the atmosphere. There's other thermals joining in and stuff like that. So thermals, in my experience, sometimes they're big, and sometimes that same thermal will get small for a few hundred feet and then get big, usually because of stability layer in the atmosphere, in the lapse rate, right? And how fast the temperature is getting colder as we go along. So I want the right turn radius to be inside the thermal for the whole turn, right? And if the thermal's small and strong, I can afford a pretty steep turn radius, right? A couple advantages to steep turn radiuses is the G-force kind of makes it easier to stay in the turn. You guys have felt that, right? Mm-hmm. When you're steep, you kind of get thrown around a little less because actually your wing loading goes up, right? You have more weight on that glider because if you're feeling a G.5, that's 1.5 times your weight on that glider now, right? It's more loaded. So, so steep turns are kind of nice for that. That also, so it makes it easier to stay in the turn. It also makes the glider less likely to collapse, right? Because of that, less likely to collapse is also less communication coming through you. So if like a flatter turn is going to give you more communication, right? So it's a complicated answer. Does that make sense? Because ultimately, every thermal and every part of the thermal might have just the right radius, right? There's I think Kelly Farina's book, he says a perfect 360 is 15 seconds. You should always aim for 15 seconds. I think it's a good like starting point. In my opinion, it's a pretty wide 360, 15 seconds. Mm-hmm. But it's a good starting point. So maybe like almost about 4 seconds per quarter. Maybe he says 16 seconds. 4 seconds. He does. Is that right? Yeah, 16 seconds. 4 seconds per quarter. And it's pretty easy to count those out, right? So if you want to aim for something, sure. But a lot of my circles are 9-10 second circles, and sometimes they're 30-second circles. Right? It really depends on the air, right? The tricky times is small thermals, small columns of rising air that are also weak, right? Because then they just won't support this big bank angle, right? You know, even if the thermal's huge, if it's going up at 1,000 feet a minute, it'll support a pretty big bank angle. And then, yeah, your buddy who's doing wider turns might climb faster than you, but you're climbing with a high bank angle, right? So not so bad. But the tricky thing is small thermals that are weak just don't support a very big bank angle. And then you might be thinking, okay, I want to turn within the thermal and then do this really wide thing away from it and then turn within it. Because if we have to turn sometime, in the lift is the best place to turn. Maybe we've learned that with like ridge soaring, right? If you're soaring a ridge and the lift band's like kind of small and scraggly, you put your figure eights, you put your 180s in lift, right? Because that's where you'll be causing the most sink. And when we're flying straight and level, we're not going down very fast, right? So I do find those the hardest, like weak, small cores, like. Because you can't get the full 360 in them. So you got to kind of plan to be pretty flat when you're not in them, so you're not falling very fast, and then spend a fair amount of time in them, but also like get some of the turn done in them. It's tricky. If you can find 2 of them, then you can figure 8. right? Any other questions kind of in this room? I was thinking of shifting. Yeah.
Do you slow down when you get to the center of the thermal? And yes, how much? And if yes, how much?
Very good question. So, fantastic question. So sailplane pilots and hang gliders before us and early paragliders, when I got into thermal flying, everyone said, oh, slow the glider down as you get into a thermal, right? And there's some design changes that makes minimum sink closer to trim than it was 10 years ago or even 15 years ago, right? The concept is not wrong of slowing down, right? Basically, minimum sink, which is some amount of brake on. I like to talk about minimum sink as like 4 pounds of brakes. It's not like brakes down here, right? On most of our gliders, minimum sink might be like 4 or 5 pounds of brake. Maybe a little bit more than communication pressure, but not crazy. Minimum sink is going to give us the lowest sink rate, and therefore, all else being equal, the best climb rate. The problem is the scoop, right? We have way less authority over our glider when we have all that braking, right? And our sink rate's pretty darn good anyway. Does that make sense? So having the authority over your glider to be able to cut through that air and put your glider where you want, for me, is way more important than minimum sink. And I'll tell you right now, at the highest level of paragliding, in the World Championships, Super Final, that sort of thing, no one's flying around on minimum sink, even on the really weak days. No one's adding a bunch of brake to their glider and thermaling with a bunch of brake, right? In fact, as it gets weaker, that's when you're seeing more and more pilots using the rear riser, no brake on, right? Because they want this glider that cuts through the air and really gives them ultimately authority on where they put their glider and brakes and stuff like that. So for pure efficiency of thermaling, I don't think it's more efficient. The reason I think it was talked about a lot is older paragliding designs had more of a difference between trim speed and minimum sink, right? And we learned thermaling from sailplanes and hang gliders. They were here first, right? And they slow down in thermals, right? Because their trim speed's pretty darn fast. Our trim speed's not that fast.
Just to make sure I'm understanding rule number 2, if you came into that thermal, you're across when you're perpendicular to the wind direction, there's nobody else in there that you're needing to follow. Would you have turned left instead of right to come?
So if this is the wind direction,
yeah,
and you're saying I came in
just like
with
that.
No asymmetric movement.
Yep, and there's nobody else in there.
Yeah, I would have turned left. Because this side of the thermal is this side of the thermal, right? Is the upwind side of the thermal, which our glide ratio interacts best with, is easiest to mentally map, has less junk trying to lead us off course, less sucker bubbles. Yeah. Good question. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah. Now I want to talk about thermaling with a friend, or 3 friends, or 4 friends. Okay? The cool thing about thermaling with other people is it's much easier on mental mapping. And guys, since I came late and all that, if anyone has to step up and go and all that, please feel free. And once in a while, someone looks outside and tells us if it looks epic out, we can get alongside fly too. It's lots sunnier than I was expecting. So no one's going to be rude, and I was incredibly rude to be here late. So once again, I apologize for that.
It's a good story though, a good excuse.
It's not really, right? I just didn't bring a map. And at the woods here, I was running around in the woods and, I was thinking, oh, it'd be nice to go for a run before my talk and get my head straight and all that. And I ended up just being stressed about finding the trailhead here. Thermaling with others. So when we're thermaling with others, our mental mapping goes way up, right? Because we have this evidence of what's happening wherever that other pilot is, right? So thermaling with others is really, really good, right? Anytime someone within reach is out climbing you, get to them like that, right? Go join that circle they're in. Thank you. Like that, ASAP, right? Even if you think they're out climbing you, but you're not sure, don't wait 2 turns to be sure. Just go get over with them. Because 2 pilots are going to work way better than 1 together. Does that make sense? Even if I even think if we're going up at the same rate, me and a friend, but we're, let's say, a quarter mile from each other, if I can get over to that friend and work with him, we're going to be going up at a better rate. So I even say if your climb rate's neutral compared to the other person, if you can get over and be somewhat in their altitude, you're going to work that thermal better as two people, and you're going to get a better overall climb rate, right? The pilots you want to go join are the pilots below you climbing up, or that you can come in within a couple hundred feet of, right? A couple hundred feet below a pilot, it's usable to use their information. 300, 400, 500 feet, it becomes unusable, right? They're up here and useless, right? For a couple of reasons. If I come in over top pilot, that pilot's climbing, that thermal's coming up to me, right? It might not even be here yet, right? Every thermal has a beginning, right? So this could be the top of the thermal that pilot's in, but guess what? I can just sit on them and they'll be on me. Sweet, right? If I come in at their level, I'm pretty sure I'm going to find lift because they're going up, right? But if I come in under them, guess what? Every thermal has an end pulling up the ladder, right? Every thermal has an end, so you might get there and the thermal might legitimately not be there anymore, right? Also, there's drift and everything to this thermals. And remember, we said the wind changes, so sometimes a vertical profile of a thermal might look like that, right? It's changing as you go up, right? So it's pretty hard to see someone 1,000 feet up and say, oh, I'm going to come in under them and there's going to be a thermal right there. No, your lift that was maybe half the climb rate back there is better evidence than that. But if they're climbing at twice your climb rate and below you, hey, scoot on over there and get above them. Boom, that's going to give you a better climb rate and allow you to work as a team, which is much more efficient.
People below you are your friends, and you want a lot of friends.
Exactly. So these are two people. Great drawing, huh? These are two people in a thermal doing circles, right? You want to be 180 degree apart from your buddy. If it's just two people in a thermal, you want to be right apart from them, right? And most of our gliders go the same speed, right? Even like an EMB glider and a comp wing have the same trim speed, right? The comp wings have a lot more at the top of the speed range. They don't give us tons of more trim speed because then we don't fit in the thermals, right? We want to be able to thermal them more. So like most of our gliders have about the same trim speed. Obviously, if you're at the top of the weight range or at the bottom of the weight range, there are differences. Speed wings, mini wings are different. People flying tandem solo, that's different. But a lot of our gliders go about the same speed. So if you're directly across the thermal from someone, you have evidence of what's happening to them, and they have evidence of what's happening to you, right? But if you're right behind someone, right behind them here, you have evidence of them, but they can't see you. Right? So it's really only one person who's using the team thing here. And even your evidence of them, you're kind of too late, right? Oh, they went up. Well, now you're right there. You're going to go up too. Oh, they fell into sync. Well, now you're right there. You're going to fall into sync too, right? But if you're apart from them, you can do something different. Does that make sense? Cool. Who wants to be a volunteer here? Who's tired? Who just yawned? You just yawned. Yeah. I was looking out and seeing people yawn. I'm like, oh, we got to get up and get moving soon. We'll all get up in just a second. Don't worry. I'll get us all.
There you go.
Okay, so we're circling in a thermal, going about the same speed. There's all sorts of things to step over. If you see me go up compared to you, right, means I'm in better air, right? Tell me your name.
JC.
I'm in better air than JC right now, right? We might both be going up, but relative to her, I'm going up more. What JC wants to do is actually aim back there. JC wants to pretend there's like a 20 or 30 foot streamer coming off me and aim for the back of the streamer. Watch what this does. You're going to end up walking all over them, but that's okay. So follow that streamer. I'm going up more compared to you. Okay, now I'm not going up as much compared to you. And you see how she's going to extend the circle out this way. Does that make sense to everyone? Whereas a pretty normal thing for people to do. Thanks, JC. Come on back. Sorry. You yawn, you know. If JC is going, a pretty normal thing for people to do. Let's say JC is going up compared to me. Is to say, oh, JC is going up compared to me, and face her. Now let's keep walking around the circle. Do you see how I actually just cut off the good part? Does that make sense? So following that streamer extends the good part, and you actually start mapping the thermal over. So what would actually happen, right, is, we'll go back to the first example, right? So that part of the thermal is better than the first example. JC followed me out there a little bit by following the streamer. And now I'm here, and if I see JC going up again, I'm going to follow the streamer again, and we're going to extend out a little bit more until I don't see her going up or she doesn't see me going up, and then we won't extend out this way anymore. Does that make sense? So if they're going up compared to you, remember, follow the streamer for as long as they're going up compared to you. That's going to extend that part of the turn, right? If they're going down compared to you, that's when we aim right at the back of their harness, right? So JC's going down compared to me, somewhere near the red glider there. She's going down compared to me. I'm going to aim at the back of her harness. Now she's not going down compared to me anymore. Cool. I just cut off that part of the thermal. You see? And once again, we'd work together to continue to cut off the worst side of the thermal as we go. And like that, we'd be shifting this thermal all around. And it works with 2 people. It works with 5 people too. Same thing. Right? Do the same thing. It works really, really well. And a lot of people get that backwards. Say, oh, she's going up more compared to me, and aim right at her. But in fact, because we're moving around this circle in space, that actually means you're cutting off that part of the thermal. Isn't that weird? All right? Cool.
For being like 180 degrees from a single trend, if there's 5 people, what's the best way to have placement?
Yeah. Let's get a few more people.
But we're all different altitude, right? We're all different altitude. So.
Yeah, and like I said, within a few hundred feet, this can still work great. Once you start to get more than a few hundred feet away from each other, that's when you're not seeing the vertical differences as well. But I'd say like kind of within 100 meters, which is 300 feet, somewhere around there, it still works pretty well because you can still, they're still going up compared to me, right? That's somewhere around like 200-300 feet is pretty good. Okay, so let's get a few of us walking around a circle, right? And I'm going down compared to everyone. So you'd kind of aim at my ass. He'd still be cutting it off, right? And let's say he's going down too. So you'd aim at his ass. And then boom, boom. And we just cut that side of the circle off, right? And now let's say I'm going up compared to everyone. You still aim at that streamer. He's still going up compared to everyone. He still aims at that streamer. And he's not going up compared to anyone anymore. So that was far enough. You see how we just cut out for a little bit and then that was far enough. So it still works, right? And it still works pretty well. Maybe the length of the streamer changes a little bit.
That's what I would always
Yeah,
seem
that-
like,
yeah.
is that when you know the guy got lift, then you shorten the streamer, and if you got or if you got sink, you shorten the streamer. If you got lift,
Yeah, sink is pretty much aiming right at him, cutting that turn closer. Yeah. Hi.
No, I was just gonna walk around the backside, so no, I'm not serving.
Oh, cool. You can walk right through us. You already know you're here. There's a couple chairs. But yeah.
I don't know what's that one.
You have to do flying motions.
Yeah, I would. Any questions on that stuff? Let's just, since we talked about thermal in groups, let's go over the basics. I think everyone knows this, but it's really good things to go over. If we're coming into a circle and people are turning in a direction, turn with it, right? How about the radius of the turn? Keep it the same, right? Basically join their turn radius. And guess what? You might be an amazing thermal or really, really smart and think you can do it better than this group. But when you're in the group, don't be inconsiderate, right? Especially the people who showed you the thermal that you're getting in, like you should be bowing down to them, right? They showed you lift. Don't come in there and be an asshole and cut everyone off and throw them out of the thermal, right? Come in. If this is the thermal going around right here, I join on the side where I see people's backs, right? Basically, that means you're joining on the side like this, right? You're joining like that. And it's like joining a roundabout in a car with no brakes, right? Basically, right? We don't get to stop at the yield sign. We have to look at the traffic and be on the outside, wait for a time to come in, and then just slot ourselves in. Does that make sense? Cool. And then we're going to turn with them about the same radius and making these little adjustments. You don't want to be the one cutting through the middle, blowing people up, all that stuff. You might be really, really good at thermaling alone and have really good independent thinking at thermaling alone, but you just have to throw all that out when you're thermaling in a group, right?
Like bowling ball.
Yeah, exactly. We've all, who's felt that here, right? When someone just charges into the middle of the thermal and everyone who's showing that thermal scatters, right? It's like, oh, great. Now that like 30 turns of mental mapping just got thrown into the wind, right? When you come into a thermal, that pilot who's been there mentally mapping it for 20 turns has a good idea of things. You want to use them. You don't want to blow them off. Does that make sense? Yeah. Even at like world championship level, we're being considerate in thermals, right? Because it works better working as a group, right? You don't thermal by yourself nearly as fast as you do as a group, right? So you want to be considerate in thermals. You also want to think like, hey, I want all these people to enjoy flying with me, right? Because the more pilots you have around you, the more the air is mapped out for you. The more you know where the lift is, the sink is, all that stuff. If all pilots think of you as this asshole who just blows into thermals and knocks everyone off, and when you leave for the North Ridge, they're gonna be like, oh, I don't like to fly with that guy. I want to go over by himself, you know? But if you're a thermal, if you're a pilot, everyone likes there, 2 pilots there, you can look around, okay, where's the left? Oh, there it is. Okay. You know, it's easy. Easy when you're a nice pilot.
So now the question is, when do you decide to leave a thermal, and which position, which angle, which line you choose to leave a thermal?
Great question. So the success to have success beginning your flying, you want to have lots of air time, right? You want to be up there flying a lot, feeling the thermals a lot, and that pretty much means don't leave the thermal, right? Take every thermal to the very, very top, because that's going to give you the most hours in the air, the most experience flying thermals, the least bomb outs. It's going to be good for you, right? So I think most people in this room are probably in that boat where like just more repetition, more flying is going to be better for their flying than trying to be super efficient as far as distance versus time, right? When we're talking about flying out of lift, right? I'm in a thermal, but I'm leaving it. It's a distance versus time thing. You're just saying like, hey, I'm going for maximum distance today. I don't, you know, that's what you're going for. Of course, there are some thermals that are drifting you into the mountains or away from landing zones. You might leave them sooner, right? You would leave them sooner. There's some events where you might leave the thermal thunderstorms. Right? If there's a thunderstorm over there, don't stay in the lift. Right? Stuff like that. But for the most part, you guys want to maximize your time in thermals to learn about them, right? So take them to the top. Now, for efficiency's sake, right? That we leave the thermals. We get an idea for the day and what's a strong thermal. And if we're in the top third of the usable lift, right? So if cloud base down to the ground is 3/3 of usable lift, the top third of the usable lift, and our thermal gets weaker than the average thermal strength of the day, we leave it, right? If we're in the middle third, we might leave it. If we're in the bottom third, we probably don't.
Yeah, but I see experienced pilots. They leave a thermal that's still decent, and they pick a line, and then they actually climb better than I was in the thermal. Right?
Yeah.
So that's a mystery to me. Is well, if
there's better lift there, you better get to it.
But how do they sense, right? We're in the lift. I'm still turning. Good 2-3 feet. Right. This guy just left and pick a better line.
That class is no money.
No, so I think some stuff that you're talking about is like almost subconscious. It'd be very hard for me to explain it and to say exactly what I'm feeling. Although, like, that's happened to me, right? Where I just have this feeling there's more lift over there.
Yeah.
More often, I wouldn't be surprised if they're seeing a bird. If they felt like on every turn there was a little more lift there. If they saw another pilot low down climbing over there, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just that they're observing a little bit wider, right? And this is totally normal too. When you're newer at thermaling, man, it takes all of your brain RAM just to be interacting with this thermal and tracking it right and doing the circles in circular fashions and all that stuff. But then as you do it more and more and more, your brain starts to open up more and more, where the thermaling gets subconscious. The thermaling can happen, and you can be looking over there, checking the next ridge out for birds climbing, look at how the clouds are. You can be feeling your glider. You can be thinking a couple stages in advance. You can be checking wind talkers on the ground, talking on the radio, whatever, and still thermaling pretty nice, right? So one thing experienced pilots have, the more experienced pilots have with thermaling, they have more brain capacity to be away from the thermal. Does Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they're probably seeing birds, they're seeing fluff in the air, they might see a cloud form that like, it makes sense that the new thermal pilot's not seeing because it's taking a whole lot of brain energy just to make nice circles, right? Yeah.
So in the same thermal, right? The climb rate of your glider versus an eagle, is eagle always out-climb you, or it's about the same?
I usually feel like I'm about the same climb rate as like a Cooper's hawk or red-tailed hawk.
Okay.
Right? I think the sink rate's about the same. So I have a higher sink rate than, let's say, most vultures, and a better sink rate than like peregrine falcons. They can be more agile, but so I feel like we have a pretty similar sink rate to like a Cooper's hawk. Red-tailed hawk.
So that's the
different radius circles, but if they're turning the same radius, I feel like I go
And
about
if
the
you
same.
don't know what the Cooper stock sink rate is, that would be.
I'm just amazed at the specific answer. I thought you were joking at first.
Just a sarcastic answer to start with.
Yeah.
It's basically smaller.
Sometimes the vultures fly with us on purpose, even though they're safe. Yeah, they can turn in tighter cores, and they can relaunch from the trees they land.
Yeah.
So, they have some more options than us because the tree. Sometimes they'll dive into an area like, oh no, you're a hawk, you can land over there. Well, we can land there, but not relaunch.
So the reason I ask this question is I'm seeing that I climb better than a bird, and sometimes I see a bird climb better than me.
Yeah.
In the same terms.
A pretty good rule that someone told me once was never let anything outclimb you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good rule.
Shoot the bird.
No, but what it means is like this is opposite to what I just said, right? I said never leave up. Another good rule someone once told me is never be happy with the lift you're in. Once again, it's a RAM thing, right? But what it means is anytime I'm thermaling, I'm looking around for that glider climbing better than me, that bird climbing faster than me, right? I'm always willing to make a move to it. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I have a question about what he was asking. He says, he's thermal with somebody and they leave a little bit, incline a little bit. Could the thermal be big enough that where he's turning on the outside edge where the lift is in front of, and as they left, they actually entered the core, and he's just missing the core?
Yeah, to me, it sounds like that's most likely exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And I bet they would have probably left upwind.
Yeah.
Right? If it was from Tiger, I bet it was towards Issaquah.
Right.
Somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Or Northridge, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And
but this guy, another pilot, when they left, they're not turning. They're kind of go very long in a straight line and then make a 90-degree turn. Right? So these are the things. And then they're still climbing.
so there's also, right, there's columns of lift and there's lines of lift,
Yeah.
right? And lines of lift are not unusual. Convergences are typically like kind of more lined or rectangular formed, or however you want to put it, right? So we tend to think of lift as always these columns, but plenty of times I've been flying and you're going up in a straight line, but then you turn and I'm not going up over here, and I'm going up a little bit, I'm not going up over here, and then you find the line and you go in a straight line again. You can go up for 2 minutes, right? And so what's the right way to fly that thing? It's in a rectangle, right? You go over here, you turn, you go over here, you turn. It's not a column. You don't do circles in it. And like often we have that convergence, that convergence that we see a bunch in the clouds that goes from here, usually it's on this side of Lake Sammamish, and it goes on the high ground past Issaquah Highlands for ages, right? That convergence line is like, man, I've been just the other night was motoring under that for like, I don't know, 10 miles, right? With no turns, staying at cloud base the whole time at like, whatever, 6:30 at night on a day it rained all day. It was a good day, huh, Mark? He came to take off and siren went up, but then it ended. It was a good day. Yeah, lucky.
But you did 10 miles on that street?
I went to the other side of Lake Sammamish.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think at one point I didn't turn for 10 miles. Yeah, for a long, just undercut. Really nice. And speed when I wasn't going up, and then coming off the speed when I was, and it was good. Going up most of the time.
Do you have any indicators on the clouds that look different for those convergences?
Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about with indicators of clouds. First of all, a convergence. Are we doing okay on time, Mark? Are we all good? Cool. So I'll give you like a cross section, right? These are the two air masses, right? Usually what's causing a convergence is two air masses and one is denser than the other, right? So like, think cold air is one way to say dense, right? Cold air on this side, it might be coming off the sound, right? Cold water over there. Cold air on this side, warmer air, less dense air on this side. Humidity content can also cause that difference in density. Humid air is less dense than non-humid air. Weird. How does it feel like that on your skin? Yeah. But hydrogen is the lightest element. So H2O. Hydrogen is the lightest on the periodic table, at least. So humid air is less dense than non-humid. So hot, humid days, we have the fastest takeoff landing speeds, right? Because it's the least dense air is hot and humid. So anyway, it's like this, right? So when you see this big fat cloud street, expect like a long cloud street, there may be one side of it that's in growth and one side of it that's in decay, right? Okay. And the growth side is going to typically look very kind of like white and clean to the eyes, right? It's going to have very defined edges. Like it's going to be very obvious, like, ooh, that's thick cloud, that's open air, right? Really defined edges. And the bottom of the growth side will usually either be flat or possibly kind of concave. Concave, probably air is rising right into there, right? And then the decay side is usually like a little grayer, not quite as like stark white, right? And has more, not as defined edges, right? It'd be like, okay, there's this area here where it goes from sky to thick cloud, but it's an area more than just a line. Does that make sense? And the bottom of it won't be quite so organized either. The bottom of it will typically kind of be more jumbly and like look like it's falling out and coming up and all that stuff. So if I'm looking at a cloud street and I see those differences, I'm going to be on the rising air side. Now, if it's not a convergence line cloud street, right? If there's just a wind going this way, typically, which side do you think is the upwind side? So if I'm looking at a cloud, wind's coming from the left, that side of the room to that side of the room, right? I'm looking at this cloud. Which side do you think would look like the growth side? Yeah, the upwind side, right? Yeah, because of all those things we talked about, right? Usually that's the strongest side of the thermal. So if you're going crosswind, typically the upwind side of the cloud is the better side of the cloud. And typically you'll kind of see that also. Next time we're here kind of looking at the clouds at Lake Sammamish, actually look, Squawk is kind of the better look, especially if it's north wind, which it is a lot. Look at the cloud at Squawk and see if the north side of the cloud looks different than the south side of the cloud. Okay? And in general, like if you have some time to lie on your back in a grassy field and stare up at the clouds, and we probably all do at takeoff here and there, look at how the clouds are forming, right? And you can kind of see the side that's growing and the side that's decaying, right? And just get an idea for like the length of time a cloud's around and stuff. It blows me away sometimes, those variabilities of like, some days each cloud will last 10 minutes if you're lucky, right? And then some days clouds will last hours and hours and hours and hours. And of course that's just moisture content and dew point and all these different things, but there's some days where like, if someone's in a thermal in front of you, you might get there and there's not a thermal, right? And then there's some days where the thermals just have this ability to stay for, especially those winter days when the sun angle is really low. Seems like the changes are just happening faster because the day, there's only this much day anyway for the whole day, the whole sun angles to progress through. Yeah. I was thinking, just to get everyone off their feet, let's do a little demo. Let's get in groups of 3-ish. And do a little demo of that group thermaling. So find enough room to walk around in a circle. And then I want like one person's going to say, I'm rising more than everyone. And you're going to follow the streamer. And then one person's going to say, I'm sinking more than everyone. And you're going to follow their ass. And we're going to adjust the thermal a little bit. All right, let's do it. Come on. Everyone's tired.
Just outside if you want to see the sky. And
let's go outside and do it. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's really, the core is your
I'm a little jealous you guys are going to get to watch this third person.
Giving them pressure at the same time. Yeah, that's all you want to do.
Yeah.
Hi.
Beautiful. Yeah,
All right, let's group up. Let's do the thing. There's two that just joined us.
All right, this is what it is. That's what you guys get.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. My name's Mitch. You guys want to join in on this? We're actually on our way to go right now. Where you going? Oh, sweet. I just live in Princeton. Yeah. I worked there for 2 years. I graduated 3 years. Yeah. Okay, good. I mean, PC. That man, I used to. Anytime I see him, laps. Real fast ride. You can do like a few laps real quick. It's, and Jupiter's fast. Yes, it's right up there. It's fast. For like a big thermal. In between like Park City and Solitude and Big Water. I'm here for the summer. My passenger has a problem. Yeah, they're handled from all yeah, you know, Taylor's are like easy festival. Yeah. You know, like instruction is cool and I find it rewarding. Taylor's are really rewarding, but it's not just like showing up and making some money and doing something pretty fun. It's a busy thing. Man, that's the thing. Yeah, cool. Okay, I gotta get back to this. But hey, and my sister's there also, Meredith Riley. Okay. She's super cool. If you just look her up on Facebook, if you're looking for friends there, look her up on Facebook and just get in touch with her and say you're Mitch Riley's friend. She doesn't apply. Okay. But she's involved with stuff. Meredith Riley. She does, yeah, a bunch. Yeah, she's cool, her husband's cool. Sweet. Thank you. I'm trying to copy it.
I was gonna take my kid, sell it, buy stuff. I'll catch you maybe at the next thermal. Go find it, sir. Go find it. What else is this?
Now you know why we don't group. Cool guys, let's get back together. I kind of. So, I'm so worried about right? Remember that. Yeah. If there's like one good in there,
I've just been
like five pretty good
one time.
it works, right? Because one
She should come down.
Driving are the same rules, right? But you know, basically, we should all try to do about the same range as turn, and then so have your head on the swivel, keep looking around. If someone's being really interested, hey, if you're there, I will go find it out. If there's just someone near me who's like not really predictable, doing weird stuff, I'll go find it out. Right? We all have good control of our lives. Nothing's good and nothing's fast. We're moving in the same direction, but someone's got to see probably make room for them, right? Here and there, a pilot will go chase something they felt. If we're all in this circle, and I have a good idea that by the bench over there, there's a better part of the thermal. Maybe I saw a bird, maybe I saw something in the water, whatever it is. If I don't feel that, my thought is, they're all going to keep marking this circle. So if I'm wrong over here, I've got, right? And then if I am wrong over there, I can walk in. And actually, the best thing for field flying is if you guys kind of let me learn back in, right? Because I just want to explore, you know, lose a little altitude for myself for something that could have been better for all of us. Right? If I had caught the thermal over there, then all of a sudden everyone would kind of like, oh, let's come in over here. Does that make sense? So, yeah, shifts happen. You kind of want to just like be ready for it, be adaptable to it. If there's multiple people in the thermal that obviously don't know what they're doing and being really unpredictable, you might decide to leave, but you know what the good news is? You'll probably outclimb the majority of people. A few years ago, someone I was mentoring said, they were kind of like sitting out my mentor. I said, Mitch, I just don't get it. My halfway through the pass, I'm surrounded by shitty pilots. Well, funny, because up in the front, there's a lot of good pilots. You know? If you're climbing at the same rate as all these pilots are doing really funky things with the thermal, you're not thermal. Right? If they're doing really funky things with the thermal, one or two turns, they should be down there. Does that make sense? Yeah. You guys want to talk about one more thing or the circle map? I was thinking the same time for next time we'll do that with the map, putting out thermals and stuff like that. To tell you the truth, I might not be have as much experience as like Mark or Cody or people who've been flying this time. So it just flies to LB. Well, if we're talking about where this is but let's get to that in a later session because I think that could use like a whole hour and a half. But I do want to talk about. I'm not sitting down and want to go to the so I want to talk about speedball picture. Right? Now, let's first talk about speedball. What does it do? The shifts the lanes that we pay yeah. All these things, right? So increases our speed, right? Increases our speed, right? We're going down faster than we're on speed now, right? Increases our glide ratio, yeah, and still it, right? Remember, glide ratio is how we're interacting with the ground. So in a headwind, it actually decreases our glide ratio. Think like paddling a kayak faster against upstream of the river, right? Faster than paddling further upstream. Same thing with pushing into the so, but it's still there. We've got a decreased glide ratio. Increased rate. Now, if I'm on speed bars, right, and I dramatically come off speed bars, right? By the way, usually we're going to try to be much smoother, not people very dramatic. Dramatically come off speed bar. What's my body doing? Yeah, it's going to right? And then let's say I wait for it to settle overhead too. I dramatically press a lot of speed bar, which is good, right? So I have control of my leg. That makes sense? Right? And we talk about pitch control with the scoop in the back of the line. Right? You grab it. Think about speed bar pitch control. Okay. Not that straight. Run through the scoop in the back of the line. Does that make sense? Now the caveat to speed bar. Oh, who's heard that speed bar makes you more comfortable? On the way, right? So it's more efficient, so it's less efficient. Yeah, so I feel more with this school car. And by the way, good pilots, good instructors, pilot instructors, should have discussions on this, right? So your guys' job is anything I'm saying, anything you come here and they want pilot or instructor or whatever, is to be thoughtful and for yourself, right? Research things, feel things out, talk to multiple experts. So my thought on it is when we're on speed bar, as long as that more wind is hitting the for sure when we add speed bar, we're asking the glider to go forward a little bit. So if we were to add speed bar at the same time we're falling out of a thermal, the glider wants to pitch forward anyway. The combination of those two things could bring us closer to flat than if we had to add the speed bar. That makes sense? Adding is a moment where like you do this at the wrong time and you put yourself to speed bar. The relative airflow on the glider and there's more loading on the front of the glider. The first we go on our race and press the speed bar, we're adding weight to the moving end, right? We're pushing the weight out, that helps weight the glider. It resets the glider more and more. So in my view, it certainly feels like it's more resistance to the turn. That makes sense? What's not disagreeable, right? So that last one I went over, some people would disagree, right? What's not disagreeable is that if you do have a collapse on speed bar, it's more exciting than not. Right? Because you're going fast. It's kind of like if you walk into a wall versus drive your car into a wall. Right? Walk into a wall, right? Drive your car into a wall. So, the more speed we add, the more energy there is. Therefore, if half the glider goes like this, the more result we get. That makes sense? I don't think anyone should. Why do you guys think we don't want to do yeah, so if I see it, that's a little bit. If I see someone low climbing pretty fast, remember, I want to end up on top of them or at their level, right? If they're upwind of me and I just go at trace speed towards them, I'm going to end up getting here. It's pretty hard to use that energy, right? So make sense? Now, actually, if I knew that whole cloud was going to be sitting at the same average speed bar would be a worse line because it's a higher sync rate than I would go. But we never know the whole line to be synced. Usually, we're assuming clock, right? It's two pictures. What's that? Oh, that was the next one to talk about, right? So, what might we use speed bar? In a headwind. Exactly. Right? The classic example there is if this is a glider, if I have 20 miles an hour of headwind, right? My trip speed is 20 miles an hour. If I just fly at trip speed, where am I landing? There, I'm in. That's like the main ground right there. Whether I'm not going through it. Okay? Any amount of speed bar I put on, that's my glide ratio. Right? Any amount of speed bar I put on is going to bring in glide ratio. In the trip speed way, the same. That makes sense? Now, 5 miles an hour, I go for a run. A quarter, a third speed bar is about right. You know, to give us that full to it glide ratio, so when we get the furthest over the ground, right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So any GPS instrument, GPS will give you glide over ground. Our phones can do it too. The glide over ground you get on your phone is like with the GPS on the phone is as accurate as the glide over ground. Because that's only a GPS. What's the rule of thumb, right? Which is lower than 5, then you higher than 10, then you have So this is a great point. We put a most efficient project, right? And comment, right? We said the classes are going to be more exciting. So if you're using speed in terms of the air, where do you want to go? Hi! Hi, we don't hold down to me about it. Yeah, you're right. I didn't answer the question great. I didn't answer the question great, but if we're using speed bar in terms of air, you can hide. Right? Like I said, with the big one, if I'm in ground air, even before I teach the rate of full speed and on the air, even if I'm not very likely to have a problem, if I do this, so actually, 3,000 feet off the ground, no big deal. So, yeah, nice one. Where was that before? Sweet. So glide ratio over ground. Glide ratio is going to be an interaction of the positive or negative airway, lift or sail, and headwind or tailwind. So tailwind, high glide ratio, lift, high glide ratio, headwind, low glide ratio, sink, low glide ratio. So I want to simplify this when you push speed bar for efficiency's sake, is look at glide ratio. Right? On an ENC, let's say like on a banana, right? An ENC glider, anything less than 6.5 to 1 usually means full speed bar. 36 to 1, full speed bar is usually the right setting. So, right? If at true speed you're going at 6 to 1, full speed is going right, and that's on an ENC. On ENC, it's 5.5 or 5, right? On a pretty decent then for half speed, it's probably like anything less than 8 on the banana, like a pretty good performance. Well, here's the thing. If sync is the problem, our glide slope is going to get worse than the fiddle bar. Yeah, because we're just thinking I need to get out of this. Right? If headwind is the problem, then our glide slope will get better. And often it's not just one or the other. Often these things are going to be video. So that's where the math gets a little tricky. And why the glide slope thing is a useful simplification, but it's not perfect. Right? It's just like with glide slope, because you don't actually know if we're dealing with 4%. Whereas if you look at your variable, and if you have an idea of the weight component, idea of if you're dealing with 50% as you're doing type. Does that make sense? So the pilots are kind of thinking, looking at the barrier and downstream, have an idea of where the 50% and using that to speed fly. But it's better than this glide slope speed fly that's sure is simple with the glide slope and have to say, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me go a little bit deeper. I was thinking about the movie this let me go deeper into this, and then if we have time, hit speed to fly a little harder. The speed, we're going to have an hour and a half, 2 hour discussion of speed to fly. So, yeah. So we talked about pitch control and speed bar. We talked about how to complex the speed bar. We talked about pitch control and speed. Let's talk about how to control and deliver. It might be bending your legs, it might be your riding. Maybe your guide works a little bit better, it works for you, right? But there's some guys that just on speed just don't have much speed, right? So therefore you still want. And then there's some gliders that there's some gliders that have really nice running. Rider pitches forward before the thermal, and then my leg a little bit. This also might be pull the rears a little bit. Then my leg a little bit. Rider, I start throwing. Wants to push back. Let me take leg. Ooh. I can punch the leg and not want to do that. Keep it overhead. That makes sense? Right? If I have my next foot right up the next step, if I need that, no. I don't do that. Right? Keep that thermal, keep that fire on the head. Once again, if the back to the side, the thermal wants to throw us out. Right? It wants to push the side over, push over. So if I boom, do that, punch the new side from here, I have authority over that engine. That makes sense? Right? And how do you do the thermal excluding? Just before I feel it's right to turn, I'll ease off the speed. And what happens is still air if you come off speed. Yeah, we go up a little bit. That's like a flare. We can put speed away. Right? At least the chance of sync rate. So if it's not speed bar, you drop some. So guess what? Now I've been bringing that speed. But I put it on. And get the head sync. And you get the laser on the other side. The head is back there. Now I can do speed bar. The place where I can convert speed to it's in a thermal. That's speed bar, right? And, you know, I go up. I go up way up. And I convert speed to low. I like to do it. Keep my body perfectly overhead so it's pretty smooth. But it's competition. There's some very good pilots. There's guys in the world. Not all of them, but some. Usually it's when they let the water really push back. And you know why? As it's coming back forward, you can put it away too. When you return, you get that forward energy. Boom, to the base. Put that turn in your I do. I do. Does that make sense? And that power, you can speed up that thermal. Will be like 200 feet higher than the other pilot. Won't get into something like the break over. Won't get into something. That makes sense? Also, remember what you said about this side of the country. If you get down, the lower we get, so it's faster. Higher it will be in the thermal. So, I'm not saying like, hey, if you've never practiced speed bar pitch control, next time you're in the middle of the day at higher with manual thermals, you start driving into every thermal at full speed. That's not what I'm saying. Right? Build up to it. We all know how to get pitch going in our glider, right? If you're scared of something like the pitch going, so we can get some pitch going, great, nice to high, right? With no probably a good place to go for reserve, not that you're going to, but you don't want to talk about how you're going to do it. And get some pitch going. Don't have to be huge. Actually, start pretty small. Pitch going. Have your wheel ready on that speed bar. And right here, keep it overhead. Don't let it turn. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then on speed bar, you can do the same thing. Right? Once again, building blocks small, right? Start with small. Roll some rears. Roll some rears. As it wants to go forward, keep it overhead. Make sense? Right? I have a video about like all the different speed bar drills and how to work them, which I will post every day, and then it'll be shared on the shenanigans. Shenanigans. So if you guys are down for a little bit more, once again, building blocks, right? These are really good things to visualize. Let's touch on visualization for a second. I'm sure I'm going to say something. But when we're visualizing, right? balancing in the water. All good fun. But what you're trying to do is feel the force through your body. Try to feel what the harness is feeling like when you're trying to turn the thing. Try to feel the brake pressure through your hands, right? That's actually creating faster connection through your digits, to your brain. Creating faster connection through your muscles to your brain when you're visualizing like trying to run on the field. That makes sense? So try to put yourself in the harness. Like if you're visualizing ground movement, try to actually feel that pressure on the edge, the pressure through your harness, all that stuff. Try to feel it sink into your mind's eye. Might be helpful, but really make it faster than our connection. There's all sorts of tests about visualization. You guys have probably heard the one I'm going to butcher, but across like tons of colleges in the US, they did this study where they took a group of college students and obviously they tricked them on what to do. And three groups, right? So one group threw basketball free throws for a half hour. 5 days a week. One group